To all participants connected now, we are going to start in a few minutes. Thank you for being here today. We're going to start in about 2-3 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We're going to have an exciting day today, and I just want to start with some initial remarks and say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. For some of you that do not know me, my name is Eduardo Diaz, and I am the current chair of the 2021 North American School of Internet Governance, or we call it in short NASIG 2021. Today, I am speaking to you from San Juan, Puerto Rico. This is in the Caribbean. And I want just to give you a few words about NASIG as a whole, how it became, give you some of the history and some of the things that we are going to cover today in this and tomorrow in this event. Well, to start, the first NASIG was held face-to-face in Puerto Rico in 2018. That was about 3 years ago. It was a three days event with the participation of around 40 people from the North American region, which included Canada, US, and Puerto Rico. And it was held here in Puerto Rico. And also, another point is that it was held right before the start of ICANN 61 global meeting, which was also held here in Puerto Rico. At that time in 2018, we were still recuperating from Maria. That was a hurricane category 5 who devastated the island at that time. But, we have to look at 2016. That's when really the idea of NASIG was born. At that time, my friend Alfredo Calderon, which is going to join us sometime today, we were in Guadalajara participating in the global IGF there. And we went to this session that was focused on IGF schools around the world. And during that session, schools representatives from all around the world were given a few minutes to talk about their schools and, give some background, things they were doing. And they went to they asked for the North American region, if there was a representative there to talk about the school, and there was this silence. And that's when Alfredo and I realized that there were not schools of internet governance in the North American region. Yes, there is the IGF, which is the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum USA, which happens in Washington every year, but a school as such, there wasn't. So that event sparked the seed of the NASIG idea. So the first NASIG school was created and held in Puerto Rico in 2018. Early on, when we were building, creating the school, we decided to use like a kind of an open model so we can move the school around the regions to different locations. So guess what? In 2018, Glenn Mcknight chaired the 2019 NASIG, which was held in Montreal, and was another successful a very well attended face-to-face event, and at that time he brought participants from all around the world. In the 2018, we concentrated on bringing students from just North America. In his case, he opened it up for the whole world. The same thing today. You can Google the school of those years, the 2018 and 2019. All the records are there. All the videos and things that were presented are there for you, for the record. And now we are here in 2020. Now, not here in 2020. We hit the 20 2020. And what happened in 2020? With everybody knows about the COVID-19 pandemic, and during that time, we just decided not to hold the NASIG 2020. We were not prepared to do that. So we didn't hold a 2020 NASIG at that time. But now we're in 2021. The environment is quite different from last year. And, we have now a school that is virtual and offers the same quality of teaching without the need of meeting face to face. But face to face is a necessary thing, because other than the school, there is a networking part and the knowing people from all over the world outside the environment of the school. So eventually we'll go back to face. All depends how things move. In 2022, if face-to-face meetings are allowed and they can be done safely, we're definitely going to try to do it at that time. But at this time, we don't know. But let's talk about today's meeting. Our theme today is towards an inclusive, trusted, and resilient internet. This is very appropriate for our times. Everybody is using the internet these days for one thing or another. So many more people are connected to the internet these days. So question is the internet more inclusive now than it was before? If, with so many people, the increase in using of the internet, well, there's a significant increase in internet abuse, DNS abuse and other things. So can the internet be trusted? And and as you have millions and millions and millions of more people using it, is how resilient the internet is. Well, that's where the theme came from, and we hope that by the end of NASIG, you will have enough information for you to answer those questions. So, with any more to say, I just want to welcome to today's event, and Jonathan Stock is going to be our master of ceremony today, so he's going to take us through the whole event, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. He does it very well, and we are all going to be in good hands with him. So Jonathan, I'm going to ask you, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Eduardo. I guess what you're trying to say is that I like talking about myself.
Yes.
No. My name is Jonathan Zook, and I've been involved in internet governance for about 20 years, and I'm currently serve as the vice chair of the at-large advisory committee, which is a part of the ICANN community. And Eduardo's asked me to be kind of the master of ceremonies for this event, and so I will take that job seriously. And to start things off and to give a little bit of an inspiration, we thought we'd begin the meeting with a video from someone that people consider to be the father of the internet, a fellow by the name of Vint Cerf, who was very involved early on in the creation of the DNS. So, Eduardo, I think without further ado, why don't we roll the video?
Okay, hold a second.
Try to find something to do while I'm dance the can.
Yeah, I have it here somewhere, so don't worry.
All right, you have it there somewhere.
Yeah, let me find it. Just got.
So it's there you go.
Yeah. So.
Now we're looking at Glenn's email.
No, please don't do that. I'm sorry, this is my bad. I will.
But so folks, there've been a number of these schools of internet governance programs, some that have been in person and several that have been virtual. And as Ardo says, it's not ideal for it to be virtual, but it does allow for people to participate from a much broader geographic area. So with every disadvantage, there's an advantage. And with every gray cloud, there's a silver lining, I guess, which is to be able to bring people in from all over the world to participate in these meetings. And no two of them are the same. Like you could watch a NASIG this year and a NASIG next year, and the issues that are sort of the hot topics of the year, might change because of what's going on in internet governance. This year's theme about the digital divide versus, the digital diversity is really something that was highlighted during the pandemic. It looks like we have the video going up. Let's let Vint Cerf do the talking.
Okay. Hold a second. It will be done. Let me make sure that you have this. Okay.
Hello, my name is Vint Cerf. I'm Google's Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today on the subject of internet governance. By this time in 2021, I think we've all recognized that the internet has a remarkable role to play in the future history of our planet. Plainly, during the pandemic, it has become a very important element of connectivity, permitting people to work remotely where before they had to be working in proximity with each other. It's very important, however, to recognize that not all work can be done remotely and that many jobs require proximity. Many of those involving physical interactions with people, whether it's haircuts or other kinds of work, or possibly work involving manufacturing or maintenance in a data center. All of these and many others require that the parties doing the work be physically present where they can do the work. The consequence of this, of course, is to visit upon the world's population inequities relative to coping with the pandemic. Some people have been able to work remotely from home, for example, and not really see a dramatic difference other than having meetings that are online like this one. On the other hand, there have also been some deficiencies that have been highlighted by the pandemic. On the internet side, perhaps inadequate capacity, maybe not enough equipment, children trying to go to school or parents are trying to work, fighting over access to the internet and its available capacity. Affordability could be an issue to increase capacity so that it could be used by parents and children alike. Might turn out to be beyond capability of a family to afford. And of course, there is the half of the world's population that doesn't have access to the internet at all, or even where they do have access, it may not be adequate to their need. All of which points to the continuing importance of developing strategies for internet governance. And those include things like incentives for investment in infrastructure, whether it's governments making direct investment or municipal networks that are essentially funded by the citizens of a municipality, or a business investment by a private sector entity, or even some combination of investors to achieve the objective, which is to get internet infrastructure constructed and operated in a sustainable way. An example of this kind of partnership showed up as an opportunity for Google. A few years ago, we were able to build an optical fiber network backbone in the capital city of Uganda, in Kampala, and then make that system's capacity available on a wholesale basis to retailers who competed with each other to provide service to individuals and private sector and government. I think we repeated that operation in the capital city of Ghana, in Accra. And now there's a joint venture called C Squared, which is offering services like this, and I understand maybe considering similar actions in other parts of Africa. Of course, the policy palette is broad, and there are many issues that need to be resolved. How can we bring the technology to people who need it? How do we deal with the need for electrical power, reliable electrical power, in addition to physical equipment? How do we make all of that affordable? Who will operate the underlying networks? And then even when all of those conditions have been satisfied, we still have a readiness issue associated with the technical ability of people to use the facilities, what we might call digital literacy, an awareness of the risk factors of being online, knowing how to protect important information, usernames, passwords, two-factor authentication, care to avoid clicking on attachments to phishing spam and things of that kind. How do we make sure the population exhibits a readiness level which will allow them to benefit from access to the internet and resist potential hazards of being online? Of course, we still have significant challenges for all of the various companies operating at different layers in the internet architecture to resist the kinds of risks that might arise, for example, malware or ransomware or denial of service attacks, or for that matter, supply chain attacks, which are quite pernicious, where it's not the primary target that the attacker goes after, but rather someone or some organization that supplies software or hardware to another party who is offering service to customers on the internet. And once they have infected the supply chain, they may be able to introduce a variety of attacks against the system, and thereby harming either businesses or individuals. So our task as we think about internet governance is to figure out what kind of a framework will allow countries and other state and local jurisdictions, companies, private sector entities, and the general public to adopt a defensive posture and also to engage in an offensive posture to deliberately go after parties who are harming others. The complexity of that goal is notable because the internet is essentially global in its scope. It's generally insensitive to crossing international boundaries. And the consequence of that, of course, as you all know, is that parties who are aiming to inflict harm on others may do so across international boundaries, or at least across jurisdictional boundaries. And that leads to a question about cooperation and collaboration in order to identify and track down and apprehend parties who are harming others in this online medium. Figuring out what the right agreements should be on an inter-country basis should be a multi-stakeholder debate. Not only the countries that are involved, but the parties who are affected by the adopted policy should have seats at the table in order to illuminate what the consequences are of choosing various options. And this perhaps is one of the most important things that you as participants in the North American SIG can introduce, which is to lay out what the desirable properties should be of adopted policy and how to actually affect that, how to implement it. If it's not implementable, it's not going to be very effective. And so your job, in many respects, is to help analyze, to propose, and then to consider various ways of implementing these policies so as to essentially suppress the harmful potential of this universal global platform while enhancing its utility in the hands of the general public, the private sector, and governments. I wish I could be there with you to have this conversation. Since I can't, I'm relying on you to keep track of the discussion, to document the insights that you will have uncovered, to share those with others so they can have the benefit of your work. and then, of course, to make a commitment to implement those policies which will ultimately benefit all of us. I wish that I could be there with you, but perhaps we'll cross paths on the net.
Thank you, Vince Cerf. Next, we're going to have our keynote presentation from Olivier Crepin-Lebon, who has been engaged in serial entrepreneurship and internet governance for many, many years. He's a frequent speaker at the schools of internet governance because of his devil may care style. So hopefully he can help begin to navigate us through these interesting questions of expanding access to the internet while protecting end users from bad actors online. As I said, one of the things that's most interesting is that the circumstances change every year. So we just in the United States passed a very, very big piece of legislation called the Build Back Better program from President Biden. That's all about infrastructure, and a lot of it's about physical infrastructure, but there's going to be a lot about the internet infrastructure as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of debates in this country about how that money is best spent in order to shore up the deficiencies that we discovered during the pandemic, because even though the pandemic may be waning to some extent, although everyone's always questioning that, times are not going to go back to exactly the way they were. People have discovered that they don't like that commute, they don't like all that traffic, et cetera, and that remote work can be effective. So finding that middle ground is going to be a big part of that challenge, and getting the infrastructure questions right is what's going to accommodate sort of the next phase, if you will, of the workplace. But without further ado, I want to hand the podium over to Olivier, who's going to give us a little bit of his own introduction before we get the session started. Olivier, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you for this great introduction. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you all here at this virtual NASIG. Of course, I'm a little disappointed not being able to meet face-to-face with everyone, but as Jonathan mentioned, the current situation is still not allowing for face-to-face in-person interaction. And whilst some parts of the world are getting better, some parts of the world are not going that well. So here in Europe, things are rising again. So I'm not even sure whether we'll be able to meet in the next ICANN meeting, or March or June or whatever, but hopefully soon. It's a very different world than a few years ago because of this pandemic that's pretty much changed so many things. And I think that Vince Cerf, when he did his introduction video, really touched upon that very well. We're seeing now some problems that were around the internet for quite some time, especially as far as accessibility is concerned and access to the internet. And for many, many years, governments were not really looking at this, and the internet was not a main topic for them. It's only more recently now that they have found that the internet development is affecting them financially and economically, and they actually have to have a significant part of the economy move onto the internet and make use of that infrastructure, that governments are now starting to look at this as being an important issue, and perhaps an issue that they need to put money into at quite a fast rate. So I'm going to take you through a quick set of slides, maybe not that quickly, but I'll try and be quite brief on these. It's a mix between the history of the internet, but we're not going to go deeply into the history. We'll just look into the basic points of how the internet was put together. What are the bases on which the internet works? And then after that, we'll try and answer the questions whether we're dealing here with an inclusive, trusted, and resilient network, or whether we're not. And I really hope that we'll have plenty of time afterwards for not only just questions, but comments and interventions, finding out what you think about this, whether it is inclusive, whether it is trusted or resilient. Let's go to the next slide, please. Magically moving to this. So we'll start with internet history, and then I'll look at whether it's resilient, inclusive, trusted, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for the questions. Let's go to the next slide. So how did it all start? Well, first let's go to the next one, please. And this is the very beginning of the internet. We've got this, we used to have before the pandemic, we used to have a system whereas Volker Kleinwächter said there were 5 ways to internet governance, 5 ways to the internet and its governance, both of them in parallel. The first wave was military, and that's because the whole ancestor to the internet was a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency project that was called the DARPANET, that came in response to the Russians sending Sputnik into space. And some big projects were launched in the United States. One of them was this DARPA project to have a defense network. The other one was to send someone on the moon. They managed to get both of them to work before 1970, which is pretty impressive. And that's how the DARPANET was born. And it was all, of course, run by the military. In the second wave, it became academic because some of the work that had been done to connect military computers together was obviously very helpful to also conduct research. And so many universities in the United States joined up and started doing their research on there and sharing results, and also some of them even doing military research as well. And that's the time when the protocol changed from the previous military protocol that could only sustain a few number of computers to this TCP/IP, and Vint Cerf is one of the co-founders of TCP/IP, along with Bob Kahn. And that really, the TCP/IP is the basic thing that made the internet what it is, this common set of parameters that allow for computers to be able to talk to each other, no matter whether they are big ones, small ones, mainframes. Back then, it was mostly mainframe computers, big machines, or even PCs or Macs or whatever machine you now have on your desktop. And of course, that has extended as well to mobile devices such as mobile phones and iPads and you know, all this basically. The third wave was commercial, because obviously the more information went back and forth, some companies were doing research, they also joined in, and they felt it was a really great way to actually be able to correspond with each other. And so they used the internet for commercial reasons. And that caused a problem, because until the early 90s, the internet was essentially paid for by the US taxpayer, and other networks that were outside the US were essentially academic. So they were also paid for by taxpayers locally. That commercial traffic eventually had a big switch, and it came over and turned into an actual commercial network. So you had an overlay of commercial, an overlay network of academic network, and then of course the military broke off as well. They got a bit sick of getting attacked by everyone, and so we went into the commercial side. And of course, with commerce came this amazing thing, the World Wide Web. So we'll see that in a moment. And then, of course, after that, we had mass media, where the YouTubes of this world started operating, with having all your newspapers and TV channels moving over to the internet. The fifth wave was everybody and everything, the new internet complexity. So now you have apps, you have 4G, you have 5G, you have the Internet of Things, and that requires even more complex governance. Because all of these evolve in different levels and in different environments. And now I propose that we have the anything wave, and the anything wave was caused by the pandemic. It's where governments and companies are looking at the internet and saying, oh, wait a second, there are some things that we believe could have worked better. Yes, okay, it's worked, but some things could have worked better. Let's do something about it. The problem when you start saying, let's do something about it, sometimes you do something about things that need to be done with. In other words, there is a demand, there is a need for something to be done about it, for an improvement to be done. But sometimes you decide, or it's decided for political means, that perhaps it's the right time to actually change things that don't really need to be changed. And so this is what I'm going to try and look at in our presentation today, because along with some of the improvements that might come out of this whole pandemic, and where the internet might work a lot better, there are also some cases where it might be quite the opposite. And we might end up with fragmentation or with unintended consequences to the improvements that we will be seeing thanks to So many people saying we need to do something about it. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the internet was back, I think, was that one too far? There you go. So how was it all started? It was a technology developed in the 60s, and screens are going back and forth. The technical specifications are all dealt with by the Internet Engineering Task Force. It's a group that operates with lots of engineers from around the world that work together to come up with some standards, and they're open standards. So you're free to make use of them or not make use of them. If you don't make use of them, your computer, your device is probably not going to work too well with the other devices out there. But if you do adhere to them, then it's quite likely that there will be a few problems with the device working, and it will be well integrated with the rest of the internet. You have to remember that it's not a just single network. It's a network of networks, and that's how it started, and that's how it still is. So there's no overall governance model or overall chief of the internet saying we're going to turn the internet on, we're going to turn the internet off. Every network runs itself. The only thing that is hierarchical is the domain name system, because the domain name system is the addressing system where you have an address book that changes between that coordinates between a name of a site or an email address and the IP address, the actual number on which that computer is registered. And the reason for that is simple, is because it would be very difficult for us to today remember all those numbers. So it's important to have a directory. It's important to have a distributed directory, which is how the DNS is done, because it's such a huge network that if there was one person actually, or one organization actually updating this, it would be an absolute mess, because there are thousands, millions actually of updates every day. So a single organization wouldn't be able to do it. And the way that it's designed is like a tree with a root and with the everything else under it. And the root is actually a single root, so you've got a single addressing system. That's the only thing that's the single part of it, but everything else is distributed and among many different organizations. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now there are a number of, is the next slide coming up? It is. Now there are a number of things with the internet ecosystem in itself, because as with anything, the internet is the network, but there's an ecosystem that goes around it. The ecosystem is not only the internet service providers, but anyone that is actually contributing to the information that is on there, to the access to it, to the governance of it. And so with this shared global ownership and the development based on global standards, and these standards being freely accessible for everyone, you're able to basically bring any kind of service out there that anybody thinks about. It's so open, it's so transparent, it's so collaborative that if you have an idea, you can implement it, you can offer it out there on the internet, and provided you can advertise enough for it, people will start using it. The model relies on both global and local processes. Let's go to the next slide, please. And that's really important, because if you don't have things, a model that is the same as that, as this internet ecosystem. Next slide. Okay, if you don't have a system that is like the internet ecosystem, you basically end up with things starting to break. You start having walls going against that. Let's see how it all started. In 1961, JCR Licklider from MIT came up with this idea of the galactic network, and that's of course the time, the Cold War we were talking about. And so there was also some work with Leonard Kleinrock talking about packet switching, circuit switching. And Leonard Kleinrock came up with the idea that you don't need to just establish a point-to-point connection. You could actually put the information, cut it into little bits, and send it through a line, give it some addresses, and they would be able to end up at the other end and be put back in order, and the information would be carried through. That started the work of the internet and of any kind of telecommunication network. Next slide, please. As time went on, 9 years later, in 1969, the first test was put together, and that's where the ARPA network was born. It was just 2 hosts, and a few months later, you can see that it grew to a few more hosts. And the first text message that was sent through was something like "hello," and it crashed, I think, after HEL. It didn't go any further than that, but it was just a few bits of information that came through. Beyond that, of course, they managed to start getting more computers connected. If we go to the next slide, it grew very, very fast. And it continued until 1992. So now we're looking 10 years, 20 years later. Do we have a thing in between? But this thing has jumped. Yeah, okay. So 1992, Tim Berners-Lee came up with HTML. That was a language which allowed for voice, video, and data to be transferred easily, and pages to be put together and easily consumed by your everyday end user. Before that, everything was a little complicated with some text. You had to write commands. You had to learn a lot of things. It was very geeky in some way. It wasn't really great for general user consumption. And thanks to this HTML, the Tim Berners-Lee really revolutionized the internet, because that opened an enormous choice, if you want, of things that could be done with the net. Starting with sharing content that was not just geeky content, not just computer stuff, but also things that had nothing to do with the computers. Of course, the first websites which were designed were all based around computers, because that's the first companies that were aware of this HTML. But the browser itself, and we're going to see the browser in the next page, please. The browser itself could be used by anyone. Here we see the first NCSA Mosaic web page. So the NCSA Mosaic was the first non-commercial browser written by a group of students at the National Supercomputing Facility in Urbana-Champaign, and it's a university. And the IBM first page here has got Lou Gerstner, who was the chairman of IBM at the time, and you could do something which was really cool. You could click on that little icon at underneath that box, and you could hear the guy actually speak. Totally unheard of at the time. And this is not that long ago. Okay, it is quite some time ago, but still, it was just so revolutionary. And with that, of course, very quickly, things became very fast, very large. I mean, here, this was in black and white. Later on, of course, color was brought in, and it just became absolutely huge. Let's go to the next slide. You can see here, so I was going to take a deck, I was going to take a picture of the North American internet, and unfortunately there wasn't much difference between 1993 and 1997, because the US, being the birthplace of the internet, was already fully connected. Maybe not locally, but certainly as a country it was fully connected, and Canada also was. But in Latin America and Central America, things were very different. And you can see here Central America and the Caribbean, where in November 1993, there were only 2 countries that were actually connected to the internet with full internet connectivity. There was Puerto Rico, the island where Eduardo is, and there was Costa Rica. And all the other countries around either had no access whatsoever. That means no internet. They had phone, of course. They weren't backwards and stuff, but they just had no internet as such. And the ones in green had dial-up type of internet, which effectively was called UUCP, Unix to Unix copy procedure, and you would be able to send emails, but you couldn't actually serve websites. It was just supporting emails and basic file transfers pre-1992. Move a few years forward and go to the next slide, and you'll find out that suddenly, boom, the whole region is connected. And so you can see how this wave just went, and every single country decided they needed to be on the internet. And that was, of course, because each one of these countries could have not only the governments, but actually individuals that would have traveled maybe to another country and said, hey, I like this internet thing, found out about it, found a way to get connected, found an international source, maybe by satellite, maybe by some cables, maybe by local telecommunication company, to try and get the internet locally. And so it grew extremely fast. Any centralized spread of the internet would have probably taken a lot more time, just because of the red tape and the paperwork that would have been needed to start a service in each one of these countries. And in fact, for many, many years, when the internet service was started in some of these countries, and that's valid for every country around the world, the governments were not even aware about this. They just didn't know what this thing was about. That's why they didn't regulate it. It was totally unregulated. It's like, hey, there's an internet service provider now. Have no idea what it is, but some people are interested in it. And that's how it went. Let's go to the next slide. So you can see that in a few years, and here we're looking at 2002, the internet became this huge spread of computers and connections all around the world. It looked like the whole world was connected. Let's go to the next slide. And of course, the whole world was connected. You can see satellite links, you can see links under the sea. Now, each one of the subsea cables took several months to implement. You have a ship with huge fiber optic cable that then gets put under the sea and installation. You're talking about a massive infrastructure investment that took place in the 90s and also in the 2000s, so as to be able to connect the world, connect all of the world. Well, all of the world? Let's have a look closer. So let's go to the next slide, please. Because really, when you start looking at the connection of the whole internet, well, first there's technical principles that you need to look at and you need to pursue. And then once you've got all of these, then you can see whether you do have these technical principles that allow for connection everywhere. Let's go to the next slide. So the first thing is the end user principle. The end user principle was a case where any type of traffic is allowed. There's no filtering. The end users have the full choice of what services they want. That was the original idea of the internet. And of course, that became a champion for innovation. You could imagine a service, you could design it, and boom, it was working. And the smallest startup company could become extremely successful. And that's really what happened. The Googles of this world were a small company at the time. I remember Yahoo, they had 100 employees and they were super happy, thinking they might get 150 by the next year. And in fact, they had a lot more. And there's a lot of companies that started out very small with a clear idea of how they were going to grow, but no idea of how large they were going to end up at the end of the day. Let's go to the next page. The other another technical component part of this is the root servers. Now, I spoke to you about this having a single root, a single addressing scheme. And so the way that the root server was implemented was to have the A root. So if you look at the boxes on the side, you're going to see one of them has got an A on it. It's VeriSign naming and directory services. And that's the contractor that has the A root. They are the original root place when you put all of the top level domains, the .net, .org, .com, .us, .de, .pr, .cr, all of these top level domains are going at the basic base of this of the pyramid, if you want, or the top of the tree. I don't know which one you want to say. It's the other way around, isn't it? The base of the tree. But the A root is the one that ICANN is updating, and so all of the work of ICANN goes around coordinating the domain name system. And from this, it gets copied over to all of the other routes around the world. You'll notice one small problem here on this map is that you'll have most of the root servers based in the United States. And for many years, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of criticism about this because people thought this whole internet network is way too US-centric. Let's go to the next thing. So that effectively was the principles that we're using for the technical stuff. We got the IP, we got that. Now, the governance principles are also interesting because it's only until about 2000, just after 2000, 2004, that governing the internet started being an interesting topic. Let's go to the next slide. And very quickly, a lot of organizations started getting involved. If you look at this diagram, which was done by this picture that was done by Diplo, a very cool picture. It shows you how the internet it's constantly a building that's under construction, and internet governance is under construction as well. And it's not just a single topic. It's got so many different topics that are intertwined with each other because the internet has changed the world and really touches on everybody's lives in so many levels. And the organizations that have dealt with this internet governance are numerous, from the OECD to the International Telecommunication Union, to UNESCO, to ICANN, of course, to the Internet Society, to the Internet Engineering Task Force that we spoke about earlier, etc. There are so many organizations that are involved. And the interesting thing about this is because there are so many organizations involved, and they are all involved on a par level, the whole system is multi-stakeholder in scope. Multi-stakeholder being that the commercial organizations, civil society, governments, technical community are all working together to make sure that the internet continues to evolve, that the internet services are able to thrive, and that people are able to use the network without being encumbered by problems or laws or things that will basically stop them from being able to do so. Well, that is the idea to start with, but we'll see later whether that's still happening today. The Internet Governance Forum is one of those fora that was implemented back then, and there is one coming up in a month's time. And of course, that's where most of the discussions that we are seeing laid out here on this graphic, most of these are being touched on, mostly discussions, and then decisions get taken later on elsewhere. Let's go to the next slide, please. So when you look at this, in fact, there's not only just global IGFs, but there's also a massive bunch of regional internet governance fora. You can see here a map from a few years ago that was supplied to me by the IGF Secretariat, and they are pretty much everywhere. I think that with the pandemic, there might have been some that didn't happen this year, but what I do know is that whilst most of these were face-to-face meetings, the ones that have happened on the internet. So it's interesting to see that it's thanks to the internet that this whole global network of internet governance fora has been able to operate and to actually take place. And that means that each one of the regional and the local internet governance fora are able to feed into the global process and then will feed into the IGF that will take place in Poland in a few weeks' time. It's a whole pyramid, and it's very much bottom up, which is really, really cool. Not only is it cool, but it's important because it actually brings the input of not only the companies that run the internet, but the users and the socioeconomic factors that affect populations around the world are taken into account as well. And so topics like human rights, freedom of speech are duly taken into account in the development of the network. So let's go to the next slide, please. So when we are looking at the internet, the first question, I guess now, let's go into our thing. I've been going around a whole discussion. Let's go now into the nitty-gritty and let's find out, is the internet resilient? Right. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Resilient, so that means it would have to be very reliable. And one of the things that we have noticed earlier was the fact that the root server system was very much focused on the United States. And for many years, it was a huge problem, and huge problem, not only just technologically speaking, but politically speaking. And now we have here a map of the root servers as they now appear today. Now there's a website that will show you where these are. And as you can see, they are now distributed around the world. So there are copies of these 13 root servers. They are run locally in so many different countries, 1,475 instances of root servers. And in fact, it's funny because if I check week on week, there's always a few more that are now being implemented. And as you'll notice, they are present on all the continents. So even if you look at Africa, with where you might say, well, the infrastructure isn't that great to be able to sustain a root server. Well, in fact, quite the contrary. Quite a few root servers have been installed locally so as to enhance the resilience of the network. And how? Well, when you are typing a web address on your browser, the closer you are to a root server, the faster you're going to be able to get a response from them as to what you're going to have. So I think somebody pressed the button to go to the next page. But yes, the question is before. There you go. Thank you. So when you do that, then what you have, of course, is the response much faster. And if there is a network problem internationally speaking, maybe there is poor connectivity worldwide or something, then you're still able to carry about your business because you get responses faster from a local resolver. And that's why there are more and more and more root servers around the world. Next slide, please. The second thing, concern is to do with routing of information. Because it's a network of networks, there have been some instances when some networks have been hacked. It happens every day. Every day there's some hackings going on, and you can't do anything about it. That's just the nature of the world. The same thing as if you walk outdoors, every day there are muggings. People get mugged. It's, there's some bad people that are around, and the internet is a reflection of the real world. And so you end up with some hacking incidents and some ways by which internet traffic might actually be hijacked in some way, or routes could be hijacked, etc. There have been some high-level incidents and highly publicized incidents that have taken place where the traffic of a whole country has been turned off for a short amount of time, but it's happened, and not on purpose, by criminal elements or by people making a mistake or something. And this is where the Internet Society and a number of other organizations came up with a set of norms called mutually agreed norms for routing security, manners, which include some compulsory actions and some recommended actions. And some of these are I think all of these are very, very important, but some of these are really critical to running the internet and for the internet to continue running really well. The first one, of course, is to prevent the propagation of incorrect routing information. That is so important. If you do not prevent this, if your systems just copy anything that they receive and that's just send it along, then what you're going to end up is just being part of the problem and not actually stop a problem happening. And there's technology available to do that. Facilitate global operational communication and coordination. The coordination of the networks around the world is so important, because if there is no coordination, there's going to be a problem with being able to work with each other. When there's a problem in network A and network B doesn't know about it because it hasn't been told about it, then you just end up with miscommunication. And it would be ironic, wouldn't it, that there would be miscommunication about a communication network. The fourth action item, and it's funny because that's how they listed it, the fourth action item on there was the facilitating of the routing information on a global scale. And it's important because it's about some parameters and some systems that are being used to be able to convey the routing information irrespective of whether there are technical problems, etc. Recommended actions, there's two of them that are listed here. One is preventing the traffic with spoofed IP addresses. A big problem on the internet, people just pretending there's someone else. As I said, a reflection of the real world. And also facilitating routing information on a global scale with RPKI, which is the using keys and encryption and keys to be able to transfer the information securely. It's important to also note that on the DNS side of things, the introduction of DNSSEC, so that's also DNS security, is also there to prevent kind of a hijacking of domain names and spoofing of domain names and what they call man-in-the-middle attacks, all sorts of malware and attacks that could be used against the DNS that can be actually thwarted by using DNSSEC. So as far as the technical side of things is concerned on the internet, and we've seen it, let's go to the next. Resilient, I think we can give it a green tick. Yeah, it's pretty resilient. It's pretty good. I mean, there have been a few instances where mostly locally, people were not able to access the internet because of the huge amount of traffic that now people have from home. People working from home, traffic patterns were very different. But as time went on, the local internet service providers have been able to actually improve on this. So let's go. Resilient is cool. Let's go for the next one. And the next one is whether the internet is inclusive. All right, let's check whether it's inclusive. And we first thing, of course, is to have a look at the next slide, which will show you the extent to which people use the internet around the globe. Now, this is something which unfortunately seems to be cut off at the bottom of the page, but the source of this actually says that this is from 2019, before the pandemic. And as you know, the people became more reliant on the internet after that date. There's also another small problem with this map, is that some countries, such as, for example, Ireland or Portugal, seem to have no internet access, or at least nobody using the internet there. And that's actually because the people who did this survey had no data about those. So they remained like this. But for those countries that are colored, you can see that there are various levels of knowledge and use of the internet. And that includes also owning a smartphone. So it goes from the US at 90% or Canada at 94% to other countries where the usage is much, much lower. Now that we're seeing this global pandemic where people have been asked to work from home or to move their job from a face-to-face situation to a situation where they're working in their home office or even in their kitchen for many people, you have a problem because there is this divide that is now developing between those countries that have a high level of not only internet penetration, but internet use by the population, and also a move from the use of the internet just for fun reasons, for gaming, games and stuff like that, to actual business or to even governmental business. Your everyday life that you have to do, all the administrative work, the taxation, all of that is moving online. If the country doesn't have that infrastructure, then with the global pandemic today, it would have been much worsely affected. Let's go to the next slide. In a way, the world is dividing itself into the haves and the have-nots. Yet again, we're seeing that with COVID-19, the countries that have a high number of people vaccinated are now basically saying, if you want to come to our country, you have to be vaccinated. Now that's fine, of course, if you are living in another country with a high level of vaccination, but if you're not, that really prevents you from being part of the world economy. You are being cut off in some way. And this is a problem that we're seeing. You can see on the map here, most of Africa has lower levels of vaccination. There are parts of Asia that have lower levels of vaccination, and therefore it's a big problem. We're still very far away from having a world again where everybody can travel everywhere else. And if you move on to the next slide, you're going to see a strange comparison here, where it seems to be the same countries also have higher levels of people, high levels of people using the internet. And if you look at that, then you'll find out that North America, of course, and parts of Latin America are doing very well. But when it comes to Africa and parts of Asia, it's not the same thing. And that, of course, means that economically speaking, those countries have been affected pretty badly. Let's go to the next slide. You can see here that the possibility of working remotely differs greatly among the different countries, but it also differs among the location in the country. So if you're in London, you have a much higher chance of being able to work from home than if you live in the northeast of England. If you are in, I can see, looking at the North America, if you're in the District of Columbia, you have a much higher chance of working from home than if you're in Mississippi. And it's you can see here for different countries here the range that you have. So obviously it's also a geographical challenge that one has. If you live in the capital, great internet access. If you live in the countryside, a lot harder and maybe a lot more expensive too. Next slide, please. You can also see that the difference between the haves and the have-not is one of economy, the fact that if you have a higher level of education, you'll be more likely to have internet access. You look at countries here. Now, of course, each country has its spread between the what one would call maybe the elites, the top tier of the population as far as education is concerned, and the lower tiers. But in some countries, the gap is very small. So in South Korea, you can see that pretty much everyone has got a high level of internet access. But if you go to places like Tunisia, where the elites, the people that are educated, 93% of them are on the internet. There's no problem in Tunisia. Well, yes, there is, because you can see here 41% are not when you look at the other classes of population. This is even worse in India, where you only have 23% of the general population that is with lower education that has been on the internet. And of course, if you're now looking at being able to go over the pandemic and be able to restart your country by having things moving to the internet, then it's going to be easier if you do it well. It's going to be easier for South Korea than for Tunisia or for India, or indeed many of our other countries that you can see here. And it's the same. I can even say that a country like the United Kingdom or even in France, the same thing as well. There is a significant number of people that are not on the internet, and they are less likely to be, and therefore are feeling the pain of this pandemic even more than the others. Let's go to the next slide. So when one thinks, well, is the internet inclusive? Well, next slide. Unfortunately, I don't think so. No, it's not inclusive, not yet. And governments and companies have dragged their feet into being able to not only bring internet access to the further parts of the countries geographically, but also to educate people. And even socially speaking, many countries have dragged their feet into actually inducing social change so that you can do more things online, and you don't need to go and queue up at government departments, at offices, at places, queue up for hours to be able to do something simple that could be done online. We really have to deal with this. Next slide, please. The next thing that we're going to look at is whether the internet can be trusted. Well, let's go to the next slide. Now, trust is a big issue. It's a really big question. And you think, well, first thing you hear is ever since the pandemic has started, there's been a huge amount of malware, a huge amount of hackings, crime, cybercrime has exploded. And it's true. You can see here the figures for malware statistics have grown. 2018, you can see how much larger it was than in 2009. It's crazy. It really has exploded. Let's go to the next slide. You can see also that it's slow to move. Yeah, you can see also here that the largest amount of cybercrime is malware. And you can see that one of the reasons why we've heard a lot about it is that this year there's been a significant number of human health and social work. So hospitals primarily that have been hit by these things. And so you've had a lot of media covering this. You can see the rest of it, of course, account takeover, vulnerability. A lot of these things are actually not just internet related. These are things that often happen locally with people bringing in and hacking things locally. Let's go to the next slide. When it comes down to attacks on the internet, you actually, if you look at 2018 in blue, 2019, 2020, in fact, in 2021, it started out like a real surge of attacks, and then for some reason, it stopped. It didn't continue growing as much as that. And it could well be that because of the attacks at the beginning of the year and the focus on cybersecurity, both the vendors and the users started becoming more aware of these things, because let's face it, the majority of these attacks are actually social attacks, in that you receive an email which says, oh, click here for blah, blah, blah. And then you click on it and that's a virus, or that's ransomware, or that's something that will basically take over your computer. Because there's been such a focus on this and so much education on this, people are more careful now about what they receive in their mailbox. Let's go in the next slide. They're more careful. And so when you look at this, you can see the statistics over there. I think what's important is that you see that there's now a malware decline because people are more careful about things. The traditional denial of service, distributed denial of service attacks that used to happen are still growing in size, because now, of course, the Internet of Things is being used for these. So instead of compromising computers to go and attack a location with sending lots of traffic to that one single location and hoping that it will crash, they can now use cheaper devices and even devices that have a low level of safety in them. So you can basically hack them more easily and multiply the attack vectors a lot faster. There's also a spike of non-malicious incidents that have taken place. That's often because of system misconfigurations, because a lot of changes have had to be implemented. What used to be the pattern of having people using the internet at home in the evenings and on weekends, and then working in the office, and the majority of the traffic being in the office during the week, has changed completely. And that really got the carriers, the internet service providers, the main telecommunication companies around the globe to have to change things quite dramatically to be able to improve on connectivity. And that has sometimes, when you change things, sometimes things break sometimes. But the good thing is that government organizations and certainly vendors that deal with cybersecurity have really stepped up their game, because not only is there a market that has grown in size with people wanting to purchase antiviral software or anti-malware software or dealing with the problems that they have, but also because the public outcry, speaking about the fact that there have been so many incidents taking place. Next slide, please. One of the concerns, though, and I'll let you read through these statistics, there's quite a few there. One of the concerns that I've noticed is this thing where the moment you have an industry which starts as an artisan industry, you know, a few hackers hacking here, hacking there, a few criminals trying to penetrate banks, trying to steal people's credit cards, trying to go out there and commit fraud and so on, has now, for some reason, become more industrialized. And you now are seeing ransomware as a service business models, phishing as a service business models, disinformation as a service. Yes, the whole thing about fake news is becoming actually a profession. You know, you can now start a company that will commercially produce fake news for others that will pay you for this stuff. This is a real concern. That is a real concern, because how can you now fight against a business that is both on the rise, but lucrative also, and pretty easy to put together, because you can repeat the same model across. So if you're going to do ransomware as a service, you just rebrand it. You would say, I'm going to white label this to whoever wants to brand it. So this hacking group wants this, boom, we'll make them pay X and we'll send it out. This one, we'll modify it, we'll send it out. That's what's happening at the moment, and this is a real concern. Let's go to the next page. So in response to all this, the government has said, right, we need to do something about it. We're back to the let's do something thing. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like they've done really what needs to be done. Okay, for some things, yes, they have. The NIS2 is a revised directive on security of network and information systems. That's why it's called NIS, and it's the second one. It's being discussed, it's being created. It's got a lot of good points in there. Of course, let's beef up network security. Let's make sure that we don't leave doors open for hackers, for malware, for criminals to be able to exploit. But at the same time, the regulations, the details of what's in there are actually potentially going to have negative consequences for foreign enablers. The first one is the goal of an open, globally connected, secure and trustworthy internet. Open, globally connected. If you're going to start mandating closing things and filtering things and really heavy-handed filtering and work, then there's going to be two problems. The first one is that it might actually block off traffic that is genuine and that could just be a new service. So you're going to have to go through some administrative process to perhaps offer your service on the internet. And secondly, the large companies that are out there, the ones that exist already, the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks of this world, will have any kind of money to be able to plow into this and be compliant. But the small startups, the ones that are really starting out and that want to grow and to reach that level global exposure, are going to be ones that will have real problems being able to comply with all the not only technical stuff, but also the administrative and paperwork that would need to be generated if one was to follow the NIS2 directive to the point. A bit of a problem. Let's go to the next one. The next other idea that some governments have is that encryption is the root of all evil. It's the root of all evil because people, pedophiles and terrorists and all these, the criminals are using encryption to hide themselves behind a cloak of secrecy And so if we manage to weaken encryption, we are going to be able to catch all these people as with a magic wand and, you know, a magic net, and that's it. We'll get rid of cyber criminals for good. Unfortunately, that's another one of these things which you think, well, you know, if you're going to do that, you're basically breaking a lot of legitimate uses of encryption. And certainly when it comes down to privacy, freedom of speech, security of transactions, and the whole concept of trust and identity, where if you are going to have your identity now on the net, you need to be able to prevent it from being hacked by others. Identity theft is a huge problem. So you need to be able to have a strong encryption key and be able to make sure that it's only you that is that person on the internet. If you break encryption or if you weaken it, that's not going to be possible. And obviously the hackers and the cyber criminals, being particularly clever, will immediately make use of this. And so you might end up with a network that is even more insecure than before. That's a real problem. You can see it's not only Belgium, the UK, Brazil. Lawful access to encrypted data is like a huge thing. And you know, when you discuss with security agencies, you think, well, what about good old police work, good old what used to be done before? There clearly needs to be a solution to this, but so far it hasn't been found. Let's go to the next slide. So what should be done? Well, let's avoid breaking things that have worked well. Let's educate people. Let's, because education is so important, let's tell them don't open emails, don't open attachments to emails that are not attachments that you want to do, that from trusted sources. It needs to be trusted. Implement the mutually agreed norms for routing security, and you need, of course, better tools for identification and as far as the security of transactions is concerned, because so many transactions are there. Transactions are now moving online. So is the internet trusted? Is it trusted? The next slide. I'm mitigated on this. Unfortunately, you can't say that it's trusted today. Hopefully, it's going to be, some of it can be trusted, and certainly transactions are nice, and you can today make good transactions, but beware of what you see out there. But it's not by actually doing what these guys are proposing right now, which is weakening encryption and having a heavy-handed way of regulating the internet, that we're going to get the internet to be any more trusted than today. Let's go to the next slide. So, all in all, the internet has had to face challenges ever since its inception. It's been, a 30, 40-year ride now, 40, 50 years nearly, 50-year ride where every month, every year, there has been a big issue going like, well, that's the end of the internet. That's the end of it. And well, thankfully, it hasn't been so far. It has succeeded in being able to be nimble enough to support the world during the global pandemic. And it's far from being perfect, of course. There's a lot of improvements that are required, especially in inclusion and in trust. But this improvement, this work to make the internet better and to make it ready for tomorrow and the day after and 10 years, 20 years, and all the future services is work that we all have to do together in a multi-stakeholder fashion, not just one type of stakeholder dealing with it, because obviously they will be biased in the way that they see the internet. But a multi-stakeholder system will mean that all of us have to come together. And when I say all of us have to come together and build tomorrow's internet and continue to build it, I also mean you. And that's probably the right time for me to end this. So over to you.
Thanks, Olivier, for that excellent introduction and overview on the sort of the history of the internet and kind of the foundations on which a lot of these issues are discussed, since so much of the architecture of the internet is designed to make it available to the broadest number of people and to make it as resilient as possible. It's important to have that foundation of knowledge to understand the implications of the questions that were being asked today. I wonder that given the standards that represent the foundation of the internet, if there are standards that are evolving to address some of the threats that have evolved over time? In other words, is the architecture of the internet do a change in order to make it more resilient to some of the attacks and things like that we've seen as it's become more and more popular?
So it's interesting, Jonathan. Thank you for the question. It's interesting because what you're looking at really when you have the internet is, as I said, a network of networks. So not all the networks follow the same rules. That's the first thing. Some are much more closed than others. If you look at the Chinese network, for example, there's a lot more filtering going on over there. And one might argue that the Chinese internet is safer, but then also there is an issue when it comes down to freedom of speech, to other social points. When you have a network that is so closely controlled. Technologically speaking, the Internet Engineering Task Force is developing all sorts of protocols by which there could be a securing of routing, securing of maybe the DNS and the various component parts. But also, this works at many different levels. And when you look at the transactional level, the websites where you are actually logging in, you can see that in the past, you could log into your account really easily by just putting your email address and your password was just, you could have a 4-letter password and it would work well. And now, of course, your passwords are much longer and more sites and suppliers are now introducing third-factor identification. So they actually send a text to your mobile phone. It's getting harder and harder to log in as a regular user, but it's getting safer and safer as well, because it's making it harder for criminals to be able to impersonate you. That being said, I think that with technology evolving, the whole point of being able to use your thumb, your fingerprint on your mobile phone, on your device, and so on, all of that is improving the security of the internet. And of course, the criminals will always advance at the same time, but I think it's wrong to think that we need standards for minimum security. Yes, we need, of course, a base level, which is what's really being brought forth by Manners when it comes down to routing security. But with everything else, if you're going to try and slot things into very strong boxes, and you're going to say, well, every website needs to have this kind of a login procedure, or every process needs to be following this special procedure, and even worse, making this mandatory in some countries and not mandatory in other countries, you're going to end up with fragmentation. You're going to end up with services that will not be available for everyone. And this is a real concern, because the worth of the internet is not just the network itself, but the whole mass of people from around the world and mass of services from around the world that make it up. If you're going to reduce this to just a few services and specific people that can use those few services, you pretty much are killing the internet.
Thanks, Olivier. I've got a question here from Sally Braun. Is a root server similar to an IXP?
Okay, so these are two different things. So the root server is dealing solely with the domain name system. So it's a machine, a computer that will have inside the database that will work between the IP address and the domain name that one is looking at. And the root servers deal only with the root, so only with the top part of the domain name. .net, .org, .edu, .fr, so country code top-level domains, and also generic top-level domains like the .coms of this world. The IXP, the Internet Exchange Point, is different. That's on the actual, what I call the plumbing level. The plumbing is the physical level at which you have the interconnection between the different networks. There used to be a time when there were no local Internet Exchange points. So two different service providers in one country might have to connect to a service provider outside the country. So the traffic will go all the way to the US and then all the way back to the other side. And it was both time consuming, because of course you have that trip. Of course it's milliseconds, but still, but it wasn't efficient at all. And that's how Internet Exchange Points, local Internet Exchange Points, were developed. The first one that was developed was Computer Internet Exchange, the CIX, that was over in the States in, I think it was like 94, 95. Commercial Internet Exchange. That's, of course, when The commercial networks decided to interconnect with each other, but there are some that are based around the world that are absolutely huge, and there are more and more local ones that cater for sometimes 10, 15 different internet service providers that exchange and exchange traffic locally instead of it having to go abroad and then coming back. Often, the root server instance is located near or at the internet exchange point so that it's equally accessible to all of the service providers that are in that area. And this is why sometimes when you look at the root server locations, you'll find that they're close. They sometimes map out with the internet exchange points, just as a service that is being supplied locally there.
Thanks, Olivier. Great answer to the question. There's also a question from Juan Lopez about why the internet is so advanced in Puerto Rico. I don't know if you're the right one to answer that question, or if we should get Eduardo to answer it, but that's Juan's question, if I understand it correctly. And if I don't, then let me know, Juan.
Well, historically, what I know about it historically is that the University of Puerto Rico was a pioneer into bringing connectivity. And I think it was an individual, I can't remember his name offhand there, who had studied in the States, came back to University of Puerto Rico and said, we need internet pretty quickly. So UPR was one of the first ones to be connected. Same also for Costa Rica. It's mostly individuals, who go back home and then say, right, we need internet. Maybe Eduardo will have some insider information on this.
Yes, I do. I wanted to say that if you look at one of the maps that you showed on the interconnection of the cables, Puerto Rico is in the middle of the Caribbean, and there are about 10, 11 cables that end up here in Puerto Rico. I mean, we're connected globally. And the problem in Puerto Rico is that, yes, we have access, very good access to the internet. It's very well advanced. In fact, right now, many companies are changing from copper to fiber. But since we have this rugged island, there are parts in the islands that broadband is not readily accessible. And after 2017, when we got the hurricane, I mean, our telecommunications infrastructure got all wiped out. And now it's being rebuilt, but it's going to be more, instead of using copper to bring you access to the internet, it's going to be all wireless. And that's what is going to happen going forward. But yes, the internet in Puerto Rico is very advanced. In fact, the telecommunications network in Puerto Rico was one of the first totally 100% digital network. I'm talking about the telephone network in the whole United States. And that's because we were in monopoly at that time, and we have to throw money back into the company. So that's the reason. Now, does that mean that there are many people connected? There's about 80% of the population that uses the internet, and the other 20% is just connected through the phone or things like that. But it's readily accessible if you have a telephone to connect. So that's the answer to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead, Olivier.
I was going to say it's interesting because, yeah, it's funny how, Eduardo was mentioning that the cable interconnection arrived in Puerto Rico. And in fact, there's also another couple of very tiny islands that had very early internet connectivity, and that was Antigua, Barbuda, and Guia. They had the cable and wireless exchange that was over there that received this cable and wireless cable locally. And of course, the moment that they had this fiber connection to the outside world, the first thing that was implemented was not just telephone, but internet.
Yeah, right. A very big cable made its way to Nairobi in Kenya as well. So there have been a number of instances in which I think are still mostly kind of pilot projects around the world, but have shown the possibility of bringing a very high-speed internet to places that historically have not had it. So Nairobi is another place with incredible internet speeds. There have been some questions in the chat and the pod about the distinction between people getting to the internet via a desktop and via mobile. Mobile seems to be a big way that many people are getting to the internet around the world. What is your sense, Olivier, on the extent to which there's a difference between mobile and desktop internet in terms of trustworthiness and availability and some of the issues that you raised?
So it's interesting because traditionally, of course, the internet access was through a computer, and the rise of the mobile has really helped with bringing internet to those countries that didn't have a great landline infrastructure, but that implemented a mobile infrastructure pretty quickly. The rise of the mobile phone was really important. In some countries, in Africa, you might have to wait years in order to get a landline, but you could get your mobile phone and you'd be connected, you'd have your number and so on in a matter of minutes. You go to the shop, purchase it, and it's there. And that's really, really helped with the spread of first telephones in those countries, but now, of course, with the smartphones, the internet. The question, though, then is, what is the internet today for those people? And what is the internet today for most people? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it something else where you are looking at a much wider variety of sources and resources? The concern I have about the mobile phone and the tablet to some extent, but more so the mobile phone, is that we are increasingly seeing a growth in mobile applications, apps, which are not just, like a website where you have to type your address and you can go to the website and you go from one to another. But once you're in the app, you are locked into the environment of the app and the partners that the app has worked with. So you basically are now in your own little universe outside of the internet in itself. The internet is just used as a back end to carry the traffic, but you're not on the internet anymore. You're on the app. You're in the environment, the commercial environment, which has been designed for you to use. It's a concern that I have because it means that you will have less variety in the future, or you're likely to see less variety in the future, as the well-known big apps will be pervasive, so they'll be everywhere. They'll probably even be on your phone when you purchase the phone, but the smaller ones will not, and so you're going to have less choice. Less choice means that at the end of the day, you will end up with a market that is more controlled by the app makers and by the information providers than by you. And that's a problem. That's what I see being a problem. It's less prevalent on laptops and on computers because computers and laptops rely less on apps and more on the web browser to operate.
Thanks, Olivier. That was a terrific presentation and a great introduction and background for the folks that are going to be listening in and watching the rest of NASIG. So thanks again, Olivier, for your keynote presentation. Without further ado, we're going to move into our first panel discussion that is going to be moderated by Glenn Mcknight. Glenn is a Canadian internet evangelist. He's one of the founders of ISOC in Canada. He's one of the founders of this program of NASIG and also the Virtual School of Internet Governance, and has also been very engaged in the ICANN community for many, many years, and is currently the Secretariat of NARALO, the North American Regional at-Large Organization. And he's going to be beginning a conversation about the dichotomy between digital inclusion and the digital divide, because the pandemic really highlighted the need for better availability of internet, the power of that availability. And so as soon as we see how important it is, we start to see how diverse people's access to the internet is and how much discrimination there is between people around the world. So without further ado, I will hand the talking stick to Glenn Mcknight. Glenn, take it away.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. I got my stick. Hey, you know what? I need to do a quick shout out to John Demko, because we mentioned one of the earlier pioneers in Puerto Rico in this slide a minute ago. John Demko is one of the early internet pioneers, but a nod to CIRA, he was also very involved with the development of CIRA. So again, a shout out to John. A number of things I'd like to start off with is harkening back to the two presentations, one starting with Vint how Vint really stressed the importance of power, electricity, in terms of reaching that disconnected or unconnected individuals, so that as we move towards bringing those people into the fold, that population readiness as well is another very critical aspect of moving forward. I also think it's extremely important what he was saying, reiterating his point of cooperation, the right multi-stakeholder mix, and that can't be underestimated in terms of the need to bring people together in order to make it work, and so that it's less harmful and be more proactive. And I also like to call out again before I start Jonathan's excellent synopsis, where he was talking about the new infrastructure bill, and he referred to it as Biden's a new infrastructure bill, and I'm sure Lee will touch upon this during the session. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to the three panel. I'll go into their bio a little bit further. What we have is Alyssa Quinn from CIRA, Lee Rennie from the United States, from Pew, and Amadio. Well, okay, yes, and Amadio is with the Canadian Rural and Remote Broadband Conference. And as I stated, I'll get into in a second, before we get into the Q&A questions for each of the panelists, a little more detail on their bios, so bear with me. So on to the next slide, please. Okay, so let's put this into context. The last 2 years, we've had a pandemic, and it's really demonstrated the serious disparity for broadband access. And when you slice and dice who is actually on the wrong side of the divide, we're talking rural, we're talking far north, we're talking poor, we're talking First Nations, tribal or Native Americans, and particularly people with disabilities, new immigrants, refugees, and as I stated, remote communities, all of which have a higher level of disconnect on internet connectivity. So we see also with the pandemic a real dependence by small business, students, and routine interaction among communities, highlighting the challenge in some of the ways and means of dealing with the community networking, government and policy changes, and consumer awareness. Next slide, please. Okay, so in context, this is not just a Canadian or US situation, it's a global situation. And our purpose of our slide, our group today, is to bring it down from what Olivier talked about, what Vint talked about, where they talked about the 3 billion that are not connected. We're going to drill it down to a lower elevation. And we're talking in global context still, 93% of these numbers that are not connected are still the people who are low or median income countries. According to the ITU reports, it will cost 428 billion to provide 10 megabytes of broadband globally by 2020. Okay, that is an estimate. This is a huge cost to bring the rest of the people on stream. And according to the recent session, which was a UN session last week, Alex Ami of Facebook, she threw a number out. Unfortunately, I couldn't qualify it, but she was talking about really high internet access. It was actually only 300 million. I wasn't sure if I read it right, but it's a disturbing number where you have the haves and the have-nots, people who have extremely good internet access and those who have just very poor internet access. So I'm not sure on those numbers, but if you like to look it up and contact her, please do. Now, the challenge, as we all see, it's not just availability, but it's affordability, the relevance and readiness of the communities in order to move towards bringing the people who are not connected online. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are some of the categories? And I referred to some of them earlier on, but let's just sort of slice and dice. So we have groups of people who suffer from income disparity. We have people on fixed incomes, such as older adults, urban poor. An organization called Acorn Canada did quite a bit of extensive research on this in the last couple of years, asking people In the Canadian context, is choice between food or paying for high-speed internet, and obviously food wins out. So there's some choices people have been making. We have some ethnic divisions and divide, and we have throughout Canada, for a number of reasons, we have tribal communities that don't have that high-speed connectivity. So we have new immigrants to Canada, the United States. Again, they're on fixed income or low income. They are also on the other side. Gender divide. We have, especially if you look at GSMA studies and whatnot, we see a divide based on more men and boys having access. So there is this issue of women and girls having a divide. Geographical challenges, the far northern Canadian locations, economically, it may not be as viable for companies to do it because there isn't the numbers there. There isn't the payback. Then you have to talk about, is there a government will in order to provide that high-speed internet, even though it's been stated as that it should be government policy that everybody has high speed. Also, we have challenges of rural communities. And again, that's a demographic situation as well. Educational levels. We have a serious digital divide in terms of the literacy levels of people. Some people are still being scammed like crazy. And a lot of them, unfortunately, are people who can't afford it. So, you know, who is reaching out to those people who need that kind of training? And obviously, the logical thing that that has to be done is providing the necessary equipment, whether computers or cell phones. Next slide, please. So in terms of the puzzle, a sustainability puzzle, it has 4 elements. The usage, affordability, financial viability, infrastructure has to all connect in order to come up with the last mile considerations. Next slide. Okay, my favorite part is introducing our great panel. Okay, Alyssa Quinn. Alyssa is the Senior Policy Advocacy Advisor at the Canadian Internet Registry Authority. It's CIRA based in Ottawa. Her position, she has been there since 2018. She also serves on the steering committee of the Canadian Internet Governance Forum, and they too have been virtual the last couple of years. And she's also part of the Internet Society of Canada as a board of director. In 2016, Alyssa has been elected to serve a 3-year term on the advisory council to ARIN, which is the American Registry for Internet Numbers. She is also involved with the names and the numbers community of the Internet governance. Welcome, Alyssa. Next slide. Okay, Amadio Bernardi. Amadio provides consulting services to communities and service providers that are trying to navigate the complex Canadian telecommunication landscape. His practice currently focuses on the challenges of planning and implementing sustainable rural and remote broadband services. In addition to the past experience as an executive in several small to middle tier service providers, Amadio credits his selection to the Governor General's Canadian Leadership Conference themed Leadership in Sustainable Communities for providing a practical and understanding of the influence organizations having on the general welfare of communities in Canada as a whole. Amadio is also the founder of Bridging the Digital Divide Canada, Green Hexagon Incorporated, as an organization that hosts Canada's rural and remote broadband communities events. CRRBC provides a tremendous information sharing forum for community leaders, rural advocates, service providers, and the government. The series is a unique opportunity for stakeholders to come together and share their knowledge and experience and lessons learned on the challenges, realities of creating a sustainable, ubiquitous digital economy for the rural and remote regions of our country. And I'm hoping Amadio will talk about when the next Canadian rural and remote broadband community event will be held. So next slide. Okay, and lastly, we have Lee Rainey. Lee Rainey is the Director of Internet Technology Research at Pew Research Center. Under his leadership, the center has issued more than 650 reports based on the surveys that examine people's online activity and internet role in their lives. Anybody involved with internet governance, it's a go-to organization to read the reports. Some absolutely fantastic research that Lee and his team has done. The American Sociological Association gave Rainey its award for excellence in reporting on social issues in 2014 and described his work as the most authoritative source of reliable data on the use and impact of the internet and mobile connectivity. Thank you. That's great. Welcome all. Next slide. Back to the images. Okay, great. Now you can see everybody. Welcome all. Okay, so we're going to start off with opening statements, and the only person who has a slideshow is Lee, but I'm going to sandwich you, Lee, between the other two. So if we'll start off, and I'm going to give you 10 minutes, and if you don't need that 10 minutes, you're welcome to pass it on to the next. So the first question, and I'm going to turn over to Lisa for the first one. Please provide your overall impression of the digital divide, digital inclusion. Over to you.
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me, and these schools on internet governance have a special place in my heart. I actually met my husband at the European School of Internet Governance. So, yeah, I just really like these initiatives here and around the world. And my organization is CIRA, Canadian Internet Registration Authority. We're known primarily, oh, my audio is poor. Just for Adrian in the chat.
Yeah, try that again. We were getting quite a bit of feedback.
Let me try something else.
I think there was somebody in the chat said something. What did they say? Take off your headphones. Adrian Sutton suggested.
Are you hearing me better now?
How's that now?
So,
You're cutting in and out.
can we move on to Amadeo, and I'm going to try to fix this?
Okay.
Okay.
Mario, if you can go ahead, she's going to give it a try. This is technology, folks. It's like having cats and dogs performing or your children at your home. They don't perform always the way they should. So over to you, Mario.
Thanks, Glenn, and I'm so happy and feel privileged that I was invited to be on this panel with Lee and Alyssa and yourself. It's just fantastic, and been looking forward to this. Glenn, you'd mentioned that I had the Canadian Rural and Remote Broadband Conference in Communities. Yes, we are planning something coming up December 13th. Haven't posted that yet, but it'll be sort of a summary or wrap up for 2021 of the Canadian landscape of what's been going on for broadband. And then next year, knock on wood, we'll be going across Canada with live events. So keep you posted there. So thanks for that. I was thinking about the digital divide, digital inclusion question, and I know that Lee and Alyssa will have their very unique perspectives, and especially through their organizations and their experiences. And so I thought I would take this one from the perspective of the work I've been doing with remote communities and service providers that are trying to facilitate connectivity to those communities. And in Canada, like the US, I think all governments, whether federal, provincial, territorial, Indigenous, all have to be commended for what has become a generational investment in broadband. COVID-19 has, as we've said over and over again in so many discussions, brought the spotlight on the issue that's always been there, and government turned around and did something about it. They put their money where their mouth is. So I think that's fantastic. On the negative side, and I don't mean to be a negative Nelly on this, but my concern is that in this rush to pour all this funding in, that I believe there's a bit of the digital divide, digital inclusion, those communities that feel that the problem is going to be solved tomorrow. And my fear is it's not. What I'm seeing from day to day in dealing with levels of government service providers in the communities is that with all the best efforts and with all this fantastic work going on, we're still getting in each other's way. And so first of all, it's, elephant in the room, supply chain, global supply chain issues. Even with all the money pouring in, where are you going to find the people, the talent, the skill, and where are you going to find all the bits and pieces and parts to do this, because there's a global chain. And I'm already on projects that are being impacted by that. So the federal, and I'll pick on the Ontario projects, the province of Ontario in Canada, there are definitive timelines, 2024, 2025, 27. I think those will all slip. And I think industry, we're already talking about it. They'll slip because of supply chain. You have our province in British Columbia, the natural disaster of all the flooding, the rail lines are cut. You can't get from the west coast of Canada via Vancouver through to the east to bring these parts. So all these things are happening. But my concern is right now with the digital divide is that, again, people's hopes are getting up. They're high. They think they're going to be covered. I think that realistically, there's going to be a delay. I think it's going to be years in the making. Another factor that I'm seeing, which in most cases is fantastic, it's a great solution. So Starlink, low Earth orbit satellites, Canada's very own Telesat's coming online. OneWeb is starting. Viasat, I think they just bought Inmarsat. All this is happening. It's great. But it also throws a wrench in the works of public funding, because in Canada, pick on the federal Universal Broadband Fund, you can't double dip. So a community cannot receive money, the service provider can't receive money to cover that community if there's a satellite solution that's getting funded. So I worry that for all the best intent of trying to get a solution going, that in some cases we'll see communities in remote parts of Canada receiving funding to implement a quick satellite connection, which is great because it's way better than nothing. But what's going to be missing is that long-term, and I still consider it a golden standard, of fiber, where fiber was going to happen. It is a viable solution as long as it gets funded. And my concern is that there will be communities that are going to be later down the road left out again because their neighbors got fiber, are running great speeds, and it's affordable in terms of the monthly rates. Whereas today, low Earth satellites don't look as affordable on a consumer basis on a month-to-month. So again, I'm taking it from, I think, maybe a slightly different perspective, but that's sort of where I'm seeing that there still could be issues with the digital inclusion and digital divide down the road, high expectations, and maybe not necessarily getting the best solution that community deserved. Again, for all the best reasons and intentions of government, my fear is that we will be revisiting this somewhere down the road where we may not have to. So Glenn,
Great.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you for your perspective. I think we have the technology solution solved, right? Melissa, can you give it a shot?
I hope so. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Yes. Okay. Well, of course, my internet is failing me, and I am dialed in by phone for audio now. Yeah, and so interesting, Amadeo, that you mentioned what's happening in BC. I'm not too far away from that right now, and there's some panic going on around, being cut off from the rest of the country. It's interesting times out here. But I'll dive right into my spiel here. So I work at the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. Our number one mission is operating the .ca top-level domain. But we've been in the internet space for a long time, and over the last 20 years or so, we've kind of branched out into some different areas of digital inclusion, including this granting program that we run. So we give over $1 million a year to different community investment projects that have to do with the internet, and many of them with connectivity projects or digital literacy projects. And then we also offer some cybersecurity products. Some of them are free for folks to use, such as Canadian Shield, which protects you from different cyber threats. And then other ones are kind of paid for enterprise. So what we've been thinking a lot about on my team, I work on the community investment and policy team lately, is connectivity, digital philanthropy, and cybersecurity for the average person who's either working from home or going to school from home these days during the course of the pandemic. So I'll start on connectivity. We run this tool called the Internet Performance Test, or IPT. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a huge uptick in people using the performance test, because all of a sudden everyone's working from home and trying to figure out, like, why is my internet so bad? Why can't I join the Zoom call? Why is my audio so bad when I'm trying to participate in this panel? And so when people started to really hammer this internet performance test, we were getting quite a bit of data that indicated kind of what we already knew. There's this huge digital divide between rural and urban internet users. So back in March 2020, we were seeing rural speeds averaging, like the median speed was 5.42 megabits per second, while city users were experiencing around 26 megabits per second. And then, as the lockdowns took hold and a year had passed and everyone was still working from home and schooling from home, we saw some changes in that. And so the speed in cities increased from 26 megabits per second to 51, the median speed. So almost doubling for users in cities. And the median speed for rural users also increased. So something was happening there with network architecture and funding, or folks upgrading their internet packages and probably paying through the nose for it. So it went from 5.42 megabits per second to 9.74 in rural. So still a huge digital divide, improved, but the divide also grew, right? So that was quite interesting data to us. On the cybersecurity side of things, we've seen an increased number of attacks. So through a couple of the services that we run, we observed a 31% increase in cyber attacks in the most recent quarter. And so that may have something to do with more people working from home or not being protected by your enterprise security that you would have in the office, or just more services being online, so more vectors and opportunities for attacks. And with disparities in levels of digital literacy, those security threats affect folks who don't have as high of a level of digital literacy. So seniors, kids are more affected by those kinds of things. And then finally, digital philanthropy. We conducted a study this year on the digital philanthropy landscape in Canada, which is to say, where is the funding to improve digital inclusion coming from? And how big is that pot? How do people access it? And we found that there is not enough money, nowhere near enough money going around for these types of projects, and that the groups who are sort of vying for it are competing with each other for very small pools of money. So it's nowhere near as developed as other philanthropic sectors like the environment, like poverty alleviation, like public health. It's interesting that we live almost half our lives, if not more, online these days, and yet there's not a lot of funding going into improving our lives online. So we're hoping to improve that state of affairs by upping our contributions to the sector. But at the end of the day, we're a smaller company, and $1.25 million each year only goes so far. So we'll be advocating for some more strategy and rigor around projects that improve digital inclusion. And I'll leave it at that for my opening remarks.
Great. Thank you so much. That was insightful. I want to point out to everybody that if you go to our website, and we'll put the link in again, any resources associated with these sections will be posted. And I posted a little earlier on the ebook of Olivier's presentation. So it's time to turn over to our third speaker, Lee Rennie. We have a slideshow, if we can bring that up, and we'll turn over to you. And just let Eduardo know when to go to the next slide. So, okay, over to you.
Got it. Thanks so much, Glenn. And it's wonderful to be with you all. And it's wonderful that you all consider the work of the Pew Research Center relevant to conversations like this. We do a lot of research and spend a lot of Pew dollars to try to answer some of the big questions that are on the table here. We don't do them from an advocacy perspective. We're not constituted and funded to solve digital divide problems or be cheerleaders for the internet. But we are funded to do a lot of work that we hope is relevant to conversations like this. So I'm very grateful to be part of this conversation. The data I'm going to show you, if you go to the next slide, is from surveys in the United States. But when we've done parallel surveys in Canada, the situation is very, very similar. North America is a pretty unified block when it comes to sort of digital activities. This first slide just shows you the amazing story of three technology revolutions that have occurred in the past generation or 30 years. The internet broadband revolution was just so striking because it changed the way that people live their lives, get information, get news, take care of their health, find out things that matter to them, form communities and things like that. You can see in the home broadband number now that 23% of American adults, and these are all adult numbers, so it's ages 18 and older, 23% don't have home broadband. The second revolution we saw was the mobile revolution. And in the line here, you see that 85% of American adults have smartphones. So the smartphone penetration rate is higher than home broadband wired penetration. And Olivier was asked questions about this and was addressing this. It's a really interesting phenomenon that I'll talk about in a minute about the people who are smartphone only kinds of internet users. And then the third revolution we've covered is the social media revolution. And the 72% figure that we show in this graphic is answers to our general question, do you use social media like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram? So if you use any social media platform or social messaging platform, we hope you answer yes to that question. It's probably a little higher than 72% though. So again, sort of a really nice point that Olivier was making is that the internet is different things to different people in different countries. And sometimes it's just straight up Facebook, and sometimes it's straight up WhatsApp. And so there are interesting ways that these conversations have different meanings to different people in different parts of the world. The next slide. These are data about smartphone and home broadband concentration, and you can see that there are divides in the United States, look very similar in Canada, where people who have higher levels of income, higher levels of education, and somewhat strikingly in urban and rural, urban and suburban residents are more likely to use both kinds of technologies compared with rural residents. What was one of the surprising things in these data you might notice, and I put an arrow at the top there, young adults ages 18 to 29 are less likely to have home broadband, in part because they are living such mobile-centric lives. The big change that we saw as smartphones came into existence is that the smartphone for some people became the exclusive device for access, partly for financial reasons. If you're going to get access one way, a smartphone made a lot of sense to people who needed to connect on the go and couldn't afford both a smartphone and a wired connection. Next slide, please. The other thing that we've tracked over time is why people don't have home broadband. And financial factors have risen in importance since some of the earliest work we were doing in the aughts that isn't reflected in this chart. So people can't afford the monthly fees for home broadband, or they can't afford the laptop or desktop that would be anchored in a wire. The other thing that we hear from people, about a fifth of non-broadband users say that their smartphone does everything that they need to do in terms of connectivity. And then there are places where it's just hard to get. And there are some people who say they don't want it. And I think a portion of this conversation can focus a lot on the people who say they don't want it and don't need it. It's not the case. And actually, I hope the next slide makes this point. It's not the case that people who don't have broadband are hankering for it. 71% of the American adults who don't have home broadband say they would not be interested in getting it. And there are a couple of things going on there, which Emilio's presentation was really smartly speaking to. They're nervous. They're nervous about the online environment, and with good reason, particularly in the age of misinformation, disinformation, weaponized stuff. They're worried about the tone of life online. They're worried about the security of their information. They're worried if they click on the wrong thing, it's going to destroy their device, which has cost them a lot of money. And so there's a pretty significant portion of the population that needs to be convinced that the internet, and broadband in particular, are pretty valuable and can add materially to their lives, rather than just be another thing that they have to worry about and lose potentially a whole bunch of money on. Next slide, please. We have seen, as I noted in that first slide, that there's a portion of the population that we call a smartphone only. They have a smartphone, but they don't have home broadband. It's particularly young people. It's particularly poor families, and particularly the Hispanic population in the United States are more likely to say this than others. What's interesting about them is that they know that they are somewhat in deficit. They know that it's harder to use a smartphone to fill in a job application or apply to the government for benefits on a sort of quirky, hard to reach website. They know that they can't toggle back and forth between files as easily on a smartphone. And so they know they're in deficit, but again, sort of a lot of their circumstances are that this is the one device that they can afford to have, and it does well enough for them in the times when they have really serious needs. But it's an important part of the story here. Next slide. And is during the pandemic, just to the point that Glenn was making at the very top, we asked a series of questions about just what's happened to you with your sense of how the internet is serving you. We asked it in April 2020, we asked it again in April 2021, and there was growth in the number of people who told us that the internet was essential to them. It's 58%, as you'll see in that slide. And another 33% said the internet was important, but not quite essential to them. So 90% of American adults, and I would say the number in Canada is probably not far from that, say the internet was incredibly important and almost like a lifeline during the pandemic when they had to be at home. They couldn't be out and around the way that they wanted to. There are, again, sort of obvious things to be looking at in this slide about digital divides. Older adults were less likely to say that than younger adults. Poor people were less likely to say that. Interestingly, if you go back to the previous slide, sorry for a minute, the numbers about Hispanics were particularly likely in the United States to say the internet was essential to them, and that was a number that was also true at the dawn of the pandemic. So there are ways in which people's appreciation for and reliance on the internet has been growing in these times. Next slide. A particular part of the digital divide that just was deeply registered in the surveys we were doing during COVID-19, the early stages, was the homework gap. And we asked parents about the circumstances that their children might face as they move to remote learning. About 93% of US children had remote learning activities during the year between April 2020 and April 21. And you'll see on this slide that lower income families were much likely to report that their child would have to do homework on a cell phone rather than a laptop or a desktop. Their children were not able to complete their schoolwork because they did not have access to a computer at home. And 23% said they had to use public Wi-Fi to finish their schoolwork. Their children had to use public Wi-Fi. So if you add up all the people who struggled in at least one of those ways, that's what that lower number 46% is about. 46% of lower income families said their children had a core level struggle with homework gap related issues. Next slide. The other thing that we've begun to address, because it's now so central to all kinds of digital divide conversations, is the literacy kinds of questions. We called it tech readiness. In a survey we did a year into the pandemic, we asked two basic questions about this. And we asked people, do you usually need someone else to set up a new computer or a smartphone or electronic device when you get it? 26% of adults said, yeah, I need some hand holding and tech support to do that. 10% said that they are not at all or only a little confident that they can use their devices the way they need to get the things done that they want. So if you add up the people who said yes to either one of those questions, you have 30% of Americans have lower tech readiness in the way that we describe it. It's particularly older adults. It's particularly people who have lower levels of education, and it's particularly families that have lower levels of household income. Next slide, please. The reason that's important is because you remember back when we asked people, has the internet been essential to you? If people who have lower tech readiness were less likely to say the internet has become essential to them during the pandemic. And it's partly because they feel inhibited in their use of the internet. And so that's what that bar chart shows on that slide. But the people who show lower tech readiness were also more likely to have never had a video call during the pandemic, less likely to have found digital interactions sufficient for the social needs that they had during the pandemic. The parents who had lower tech readiness and who remote schooled their children, they felt less prepared to be helping their children do the kinds of homework assignments they were getting and other school assignments they were getting. And those parents were more likely to report those people were more likely to report difficulty signing up for vaccines. Of course, in both of our countries, the vaccine registration and appointment process was very anchored in online experiences. And a lot of people needed hand-holding to get through some of the challenges of using the internet to get those appointments. Next slide. And then we finally looked at people who struggle to pay their bills and people who struggled on their connections. And it tends to be people who have lower levels of income. They experienced problems. They were more likely to experience problems in the way that I think Alyssa was describing, and they were more likely to struggle to pay their bills in doing this. So this is all part of a package related to their struggles. Next slide. And that's it for me. So you can take my slides off, and I'm happy to go back to you, Glenn.
Great, thank you so much. There's a number of things you brought up that have U.S. context. And I just wanted to turn to Alyssa, and I'm going off script here, but Alyssa and Mario, is there anything that you either of you have any Canadian experience or observations that would mimic or be contrarian to what Lee was saying?
I can jump in here. It tracks pretty well against the American numbers from what we can see. We don't have, as granular data as you do at Pew. But my anecdotal experience would reflect the same thing. Certainly, I'm so interested in the tech readiness gap and the certain demographics reticence or full-on just decline to use technology. And I mean, I experience it with much of my family, like the QR codes for your vaccine passport in Canada, like my dad can't get that on his phone. It had to be screenshotted and put on there beforehand in order to be able to show it, or he got locked out of his Facebook account and now he just can't get back into Facebook. It just, doesn't have the password, or the email address has also been locked out. So yeah, it's just, there's this just certain sector of folks who is just being left further and further behind as we go more and more online. And it's how do you make it easier or facilitate ease of use for these things. And like the vaccine passport, for example, is one of the big ones. What does the future of that look like, or international travel with that, or what are the expectations on folks going to be? Anyways, I just wanted to engage with that a little bit.
Great. Mario, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, actually, as Alyssa was mentioning that, and Lee was presenting, I was thinking about my wife as an elementary school teacher, who, like everybody else, right, had to pivot during COVID. And that's when it started hitting me, the divides were just everywhere. And, we're in a community where there's fiber, there's wireless, but it had nothing to do with the connectivity. There was a lot to do with, or I should say, it had nothing to do with connectivity. Obviously, there was connectivity, but there was the other aspect of literacy. And then what I thought was a unique issue was half the day she teaches low vision children, blind children. And she's in class with them, and she's Braille. And all of a sudden, these children she was trying to help, how do you suddenly pivot and help children that have this this challenge to learn? How do you suddenly do this online and get this all going? And it took a long time and a lot of work behind the scenes with colleagues across across the world, really. And that's when it was really starting to drive home for me. I've always been in the business of telecom. I always sort of deal in the physical divide, that. But then, as Lee was going through his presentation, everything that Alyssa mentioned, it just struck me over COVID that these things that we took for granted, and suddenly in a community that is very well built out, yet there were children that were disenfranchised, who were disconnected and couldn't engage in daily education. So thanks for the question, Glenn.
Great, thank you. What struck me, and Lee, you're familiar with the NDIA. That's a National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which has been pushing the infrastructure dollars for broadband, and how extensive is the networks in the U.S. that actually are bringing this to the level of the politicians, and vice versa with the Canadian guests. We just recently had a Canadian election, and I'm just curious if there's such an alliance or a political will in Canada to move this along. So first to you, Lee. I think you're muted.
Excuse me for coughing at the absolutely wrong time. So there are extensive networks, and there's a pretty robust civil society sort of cohort in the United States, particularly for seniors and for lower income communities. And to Alyssa's point before, I mean, it was a really wise one about when she was talking about philanthropy. I think one of the things that certainly American civil society actors are finding is that trying to do broadband alone is much harder than trying to serve people holistically. The people who are struggling with broadband sometimes have housing issues, sometimes have health issues, sometimes have education issues. And so there's a pretty active set of incentives for groups to be banding together to address these things holistically. And so in a way, the American civil society infrastructure is looking a lot more like social justice groups banding together and trying to address a variety of these things together. And the other point to make, of course, is that it's not just provision of access. It's for so many people now, it speaks to these tech readiness and resistance issues. There's a lot of tech support, hand-holding, riding alongside people as they start using these technologies.
Great. Listen, and Mario, do you know of a network in Canada pushing these issues? And what's your view on the last election or political will in Canada?
Okay, I learned. I don't, but I do have a view on the political. and again, it ties into my ramble at the beginning about fantastic investment by government, but I saw the unfortunate part, I believe, was because of some early politicking for the federal election, certain programs or funding announcements were made out of political convenience. They weren't baked well and behind. And again, I go back to, I see communities with high expectations, but really stuff was announced out of expediency for votes, I think, in some cases, and not in all cases, but in some. And I see the ripple effects in behind that may have impacted projects.
Alyssa, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that the situation that we're in was exacerbated by a lack of foresight and planning and strategizing by government until the proverbial expletive hit the fan, right? So we were not prepared. And then there was all of this scrambling to get some of the funding mechanisms in place, like the Universal Broadband Fund, and distribute those monies, but without the necessary planning and structure and, you know, formality around it. And so there was a scramble to get all this money out the door and to have some announceables for government to be able to say, we threw money at this problem and now the situation is vastly improved because of your friendly neighborhood politician. But that's, you know, not been as effective as it could have been if the powers that be had been thinking about this strategically for the last decade or more, like they should have been. And it doesn't really become an election issue across the country, especially in the course of a pandemic when there's all these other competing priorities for media attention, because the problems are kind of localized to rural. It's not a nationwide question of, you know, how do we lift everybody's boats, because it only affects, you know, smaller parts of the country, and it's not where the majority of the population is. So that's all I would add to that.
Okay, so let me turn back to the script. I have, I think we're doing pretty good for time. We have 30 minutes, so I have 3 questions and then closing remarks, and then we can open it up to Q&A. Okay, I'll start with Lee. Which groups, based upon your location, ethnicity, income categories, are facing the biggest challenge? And I know there's a lot of different groups in your analysis, but which group do you think you could single out that has the biggest challenges to access affordable and reliable internet connectivity?
One of the words I think any number of us have learned in the past 2 years is intersectionality. And so I think it's people who are poor and also live in rural areas, people who are older and live in inner cities. One of the striking things we've seen around the world in interesting ways is that people who are English speaking proficient, no matter what the language of their country, are much more likely to be internet and smartphone users. So there are language issues that get overlaid in a lot of these calculations too. So the most remote areas probably struggle the most, because literally getting the connectivity is their biggest issue. But there are just innumerable kinds of ways that families struggle, even if they have connectivity, because sometimes this stuff doesn't work well. Sometimes it isn't easy to navigate. Sometimes there are confusions. Sometimes there are awful people standing in their way.
Now, so are we seeing any improvements in those disadvantaged groups time over time, or is it pretty well staying steady?
Yeah, sorry, to other folks.
No, they're defaulting to you, and then we'll go.
So it was interesting after the 2008 recession and the stimulus activities in the United States that emerged from that. One of the real strategy decisions that was made at the time was to spread broadband connectivity, but to do it through anchor institutions and communities like libraries, community technology centers, and things like that. Even in the current stimulus package, there's still quite a strong emphasis on that. The logic of it, makes decent sense based on our data, which is that particularly to the degree that there has to be a tech support hand-holding learning process that goes along with access. Librarians, those who sit in community technology centers, are the right people and often well inclined, well disposed, able to pass along the kind of soft support for technology use that has to go along with the hardware.
Definitely, the librarians are the unsung heroes in this situation.
They are in many ways.
Indeed. Alyssa, your comment on that question? So it's basically, which group do you think is facing the most challenges in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, judging by the applications to our community investment program and the funded projects, it's First Nations communities and other sort of remote and northern communities. So over half of our grants this year went to Indigenous communities, and then another third are, northern Saskatchewan, northern Ontario. And that kind of really hit home for me. I was crossing the country this summer. I rode my motorcycle across the country, and just the remoteness of Canada, much of Canada. I mean, you'd be crossing Highway 1 or, going through Northern Ontario, and all of a sudden there's these long highways. You look at the map and they just kind of go forever and then culminate in an Indigenous community. And nobody really goes there except for to bring goods and services back, or it's a flying community. And so these are the places that are being left out, and they're geographically quite disconnected. And then the pandemic, of course, has exacerbated this. So, they closed themselves off to prevent health risks. And so that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I just want to mention that tomorrow's session moderated by Mark Boole, he's done 3 or 4, maybe 4 sessions on the Indigenous Summit on connectivity. And Sally is on one of our panelists. She's online today too. She's quite familiar with your observations as well. Thank you. Amadia, what's your view on who is the most disadvantaged in the mix in Canada?
I have to echo what Alyssa said from the Canadian perspective. I'm purely anecdotal and just dealing with even my client base or through our conference. It is, as she said, the vast ruralness and remoteness of Canada and our geography, and these communities that are truly on their own, so far out along these highways and extensions of roads, are far north. I know there's a lot of, there are several exciting projects on the go in terms of fiber connectivity and again, LEO satellites and satellites in general. But yeah, I have to agree. That's what I see. I do know, in dealing with some clients closer to the urban centers, they are, correct to point out that there are pockets, even, as we say, in the shadow where you can see the CN Tower and you have no connectivity. And that's not, not just a connectivity issue, but it's also, we talked about digital inclusion and all the elements of that that make those areas difficult to service in some cases. Those farm communities where there's just zero business case for a service provider to run services out that far. It may not be a pocket of 1,000 people, but it could be those 20 that are left out. So
great, thank you. I'm going to turn to the next question. And I'm thinking of the innovations. Facebook is heralding their great achievement on the ringing Africa with cable. We're looking at some of the interesting stuff that Microsoft has done on TV white space in different parts of the world. Think of the innovations for a minute about what the private sector, what government's doing, what community, grassroots community networks are doing. Is there any best practices that you can think of that you can share with us that could inspire some of these disconnected communities to say, yeah, I like that project and I want to take that on as something that we can solve our own issues. So Lee, is there any best practice that you can think of from a American point of view?
You can never go wrong when you quote Vint Cerf, back to Vint Cerf. And if you can, so some of the innovations that have come across my screen essentially involve you bringing your own electricity along with your connectivity. The innovations in batteries, the innovations in lower power usage of certain kinds of technologies. So, there's a way for that potentially to make a big difference in hard to serve areas. The other thing that, I hear a lot about is just making the interfaces easier to use. Judith Hellerstein was making a comment about, the problems that older adults have with these technologies, and Alyssa was talking about her family. So you can imagine voice interfaces, even other kinds of interfaces, rather than typing and swiping, and would make a big difference too for people getting the highest use out of the technology with the lowest sort of effort and cognitive burden for using all this stuff.
Okay, thank you. Mario, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, and Lee, thanks for the comment about power. I was thinking, I'm working with a group in a remote area, and suddenly the discussions come up about, gee, we're going to haul fiber in, we should haul power in, and something I haven't, I worked on wireless and certainly know that you can't get power to the site or do something innovative to power up that site. It's too bad you have a tower, but you can't really do much. But communities that have very, very poor hydro or electric supply that could be benefiting from almost a dig once type of policy. Once you bring in the fiber in, you can also, improve the power. But I was thinking more in terms of funding. I've seen, I think it was innovative this past year, that there have been several private funders, so investment firms, companies, insurance companies, groups with money that have traditionally invested in other types of infrastructure projects with a 20 to 30 year payback model, suddenly realizing, gosh, connectivity, broadband, essential service, why are we not providing funding to communities that are used to dealing with a 20 to 30 year type of loan and bidding? So I've now been able to witness several communities, and I know many more, that are looking at, as Alyssa mentioned, philanthropy is, we could use more of that. There's not enough funding, but there's these funders out there that, if they can connect a community of 100 homes or 50 homes, but do multiples and pull it together, they can provide that little extra bit of money, funding that a community can use. And in several of the cases, the community is actually becoming partners to these builds. And so that, as opposed to the money flowing to a third-party service provider, like it has for so many years, that they are paying themselves and investing in their own community and can use those funds to further enhance their own internal innovation and investment. So to me, I think that's innovative. It's not technology, but it's a different way to solve a problem using funding from a group that was funding hospitals and police stations. So fund the infrastructure, the broadband infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Alyssa, do you have any projects you've seen that really tickle your fancy that you believe is worth mentioning as a best practice?
Yeah, I mean, any community-driven and owned fiber to the premise project is sort of the gold standard in rural connectivity, and where we can facilitate those, that's going to be awesome for that community. So the one I always like to point to, and I guess it's not innovative, but it's been around over a decade now, is Old in Alberta. And they created this sort of partly private, partly public fiber to the premise community network, and they built it themselves, and they used a bunch of local talent, and now they have some of the fastest internet speeds in Canada. But barring the gold standard, I have been one of the beta testers for Starlink's low Earth orbit satellites, and I gotta admit, I was a huge skeptic of low Earth orbit, but at least in the beta version, it performs relatively well. It's definitely not fiber. In the handoffs of satellite to satellite, which are quite frequent, you get a bit of a drop, and like the audio will drop for a second, so it's not great for video conferencing or things like that. But as a stopgap, it's a pretty cool service. That being said, it's also very expensive, and what does that look like when satellite programs like that are ultimately released to a bigger market? Does the bandwidth support a big user base? How much is it going to cost? All those kinds of things. What does the space junk look like with thousands more satellites in the sky? But that's a really interesting one for me.
Great, thank you. Yeah, from what all of you are saying, I think we would all benefit by having some kind of cross-reference or even a series of papers talking about best practice. Maybe possibly that could foster a manifesto, but time will tell. If we didn't have to sleep, I'm sure we could do all of that in due course. Just before I forget, Amadio, when is your next conference? I just wanted to make sure we do a shout on that, because I know yours was delayed last year and the year before, right?
Yeah, we've been doing virtual. So the next virtual, hopefully last, probably not, will be this coming December 13th, Monday, December 13th. So I'll just post the website up. The site's not revised yet. We're just finalizing the details and behind. So hopefully within the week, all the details will be up. But it looks like it'll be up, and it'll be talking about some similar issues. So
what is interesting about your conference, you not just do it at one location, you had multiple locations, correct?
Yeah, and so for 2022, in May, we'll be north of Toronto, so in a little community near Lake Simcoe and Sutton. Then in September, we'll be in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and November in Banff, Alberta.
Okay.
So we're going across Canada.
Right across.
That's right, Alyssa. You're
to
dragging you over. But yeah, thanks. And doing probably online workshops in between, just so we can go deep, dive deeper into topics.
Perfect. Yeah. And when is the do you guys have Alyssa, so the Canadian Internet Forum, do you guys have dates for 22? Do you have a particular date that you guys will be doing something, and or is there another CIRA event that will be coming up that's worth sharing with the viewers?
So Canadian IGF will be having another session in February sometime. We're not sure what the topic is of it yet, but Glenn, I will let you know, and then you can let your community know. Yeah. We just had one yesterday about this new piece of legislation in Canada about online harms. And then next week, CIRA is having an event focused on Indigenous connectivity you can find the info on the website, but I don't remember which day it is. I think it's Wednesday next week.
Okay, great. Perhaps we can have that info for the session tomorrow. Remember, it's on tribal connectivity, and we'll make sure that's shared with everyone. How about you, Lee? I know we always see you at the IGFs in USA, and those were virtual last year. Any big plans of being at the IGF USA this year? If I don't know if it's going to be face to face, I have to talk to them.
They're always so nice to me to do. In recent years, I've been giving a presentation before the gathering, so that the sort of state of play in the United States, I get to run through it. And particularly in the pandemic era, there's been a lot of interesting stuff related to everything that's on the IGF's mind: infrastructure, education, policy, and things like that. So, that tends to be in the springtime and summer. And people can always check out the Pew Internet website. We keep getting funded because we keep being relevant and keep getting traffic. And so I'm just going to plead for attention.
Great. I normally that kind of question is asked right at the very end, but I thought it was so important to share some of the things you guys are doing. I thought I moved it up. So I'm going to move to the last question. I wanted to give you guys an opportunity, now that you've listened to each other and you're thinking this concept through, is there any closing remarks and a minute or so, but whatever you feel comfortable with to close this off, and then we'll turn over to our moderator to open up the questions. I see some in the queue. So Alyssa, you first, and Lee, then Mario last.
Closing remarks. I think that Lee, your presentation was quite inspiring for us. Just the type of data you're collecting. I really want that for Canada as well, because it's such a good tool to advocate to policymakers. Like, this is exactly where the gaps are. Like, this is where we need to focus our policy expertise, and probably a funding gap associated with that. So yeah, that was quite inspiring. And then overall, I mean, we live in a digital world. The metaverse is apparently coming. Like, it's only more and more connected, and the more that we leave folks behind, the bigger this gap gets, and we need to focus on fixing it now.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think I have Lee next.
So I'm going to look backwards and then look forwards. One of the comforting things that I think everybody watching can take away is that these conversations have occurred every time a new technology, a new medical innovation, a new education innovation rolls out in a culture. There's a process to this. It doesn't happen with a big bang. It happens as it unfolds. And some people are early to the mark, early adopters, and some people have struggled to get there even years and years and years and years into the process. But well-meaning people, and smart policies usually solve a lot of the problems that the initial innovation created. And so I just want to salute the people who are doing the work on the ground here, Alyssa and Mario first foremost. And to double down on encouraging that they keep working at it, because it can be done and progress can be made. Looking into the future, I want to sort of key off something Alyssa said. The revolution hasn't ended. As a matter of fact, we're pretty early on in a lot of this stuff. And if you look at the way, for instance, that artificial intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, human enhancement technologies, wearables, the Internet of Things, are going to be rolling out in the next decade. This meeting in 2026 or 2031 is going to be focused on new and quite urgent things. I mean, one of the big concerns that a lot of experts have about the future is that the tech savvy are going to get better off, and essentially the rich are going to get richer. They'll be using stuff, taking advantage of stuff, watching innovation roll out quickly, embracing it in ways that will push them even further away from those who are not quite as tech savvy and don't have the resources and education to take advantage of all of these things. So that's another reason to double down on this work now, because the future is actually going to be serving up equally as much challenging things, if not more challenging things.
That's an excellent point. Thank you all for those final comments. I want to turn over to our moderator. He's going to handle the questions.
Thanks, Glenn. And thanks, everyone. It's Jonathan Zook again here to add some questions into the mix that have been asked by the attendees. The first is Adrian Sutton is, what do you think that everyday residents could do to get more involved in closing the digital divide? And that's to anyone.
Well, I think it depends on which aspects of the digital divide. But I know some of the projects that we've funded at CIRA over the years are as simple and grassroots as delivering some digital literacy education to folks in seniors' homes. There's probably something like that that you could seek out in your own community. Digital seniors programs exist at least all over Canada. In terms of rural connectivity, writing your members of parliament or whoever your representatives are, and expressing how important it is to make it a policy issue that is first and foremost. So when an election rolls around, that the political will is there to actually address this, like to make it an election issue. Yeah, that's I'll leave it at that and pass it to you guys.
Anyone else want to tackle that question, how individuals can get involved? Adrian also asked about local government and if there's things that local governments should be doing to stimulate broadband penetration and otherwise do educational programs, et cetera, to close the digital divide.
If I may, on the community side for the local government, I think there's several things they can do. Is look at the options, start interviewing or asking for face-to-face discussions with those service providers that are in the area. Another thing is look at their own internal policies and procedures. So if I talk about municipal government, brush off some of those old, template tower siting documents and your municipal consent process that kind of exists. Take a look at that. I know of several that have done that, and it just makes it more welcoming and removes a few of the steps for service providers that are interested in coming into the community. And they would, there's two side by side, we probably would deal with the one that seems to have all their processes and information together. And find someone, a passionate person or group in the organization to be your broadband champion. I think don't rely just on, the politicians can't do it all. They have to, go with the flow, but find somebody on staff, somebody that's there that has roots to be that advocate. You're drawing from the service providers, you're feeding information to the politicians and the groups within. But I think that a broadband advocate, a broadband champion has been very, very effective for those communities that have implemented that.
I'm going to pick up on Alyssa's point and note that there's sort of a natural alliance to be struck between the older adults who might need tech support, tech teaching, tech handholding, and the younger folks who are in their families and in their communities. Right. One of the just amazing things that's happened in the rise of social media is that all kinds of people are now content creators of the most ingenious, compelling, heartwarming, heartbreaking way. And the fastest way to draw human beings into community is to tell stories. And having young people sort of strike an alliance with the older folks, teach them how to do it, maybe be the facilitator. Tell me your story and we'll get it out there. I think that's just a sort of natural community building activity that's just, it couldn't be more low touch. It's not sort of saying get more civically involved. It's like go to one of those homes and spend an afternoon filming a cool older person and telling their story, and then go back and show it to them. And if they're okay with it, show it to the world.
Thanks, Lee. That's a good idea. One of the things I wanted to do, I know that Amedeo, at the very top of the session, you expressed concern about large infrastructure bills and stimulus packages and things like that because of a kind of panacea effect that might occur. That it leads people to believe that the problems are solved now that money's being thrown at them. What is the other side of that issue? And I don't know. Again, I'm very curious because we just passed this big bill here in the United States, and Glenn shockingly has stacked the panel with Canadians. But
I wonder why.
but in terms of these kinds of infrastructure investments, generally, there's always a kind of a tension between like public utilities for things like 5G, et cetera, versus stimulus for commercial activity in those areas. If each of you had a wish list for how the broadband related stimulus money that will come out of this Build Back Better program United States is spent, including like what level of government it might be spent at, because that'll be some of the disputes that are going on, is how much should be federal, how much should be state, how much should be local, how much should be done through public services versus public-private partnerships versus stimulus, et cetera. When there's this huge chunk of money out there, what do you think is the best way that it gets spent to kind of avoid some of the pitfalls that Amedeo raised at the top of the session? That's anybody who wants to go.
Yeah. I tend to believe in the more local, the better, and then the people then feel more connected to, a more local project. So in the case of the states, that would be the state level and the county or municipal level. Similar in Canada at the provincial and municipal level. And then in the ICANN world, we talk about public interest commitments being put into contracts and things like that. And so any kind of public-private partnership funds have to be very pointed and prescriptive in how the funds are to be used, because as soon as you start working with a publicly traded company who needs to, which are the big telecoms in Canada or in the US, right? As soon as they have access to these funds, they have the mechanisms and the expertise and the market share to gobble them up. And that's what we've seen in Canada, is a lot of these funds end up going to the incumbent internet service provider, and then not necessarily to the areas most in need of connectivity. And so when you allocate more closely to the community, you tend to get smaller companies carrying out these projects that are closer to the community. And those, I think, tend to have better results.
Thanks, Alyssa. And anyone else want to jump in on that issue? How to go from big to small, I guess, when it comes to these huge infrastructure investments.
I'm going to take a page from the U.S. Congress and yield the balance of my time to Amedeo to make sure that he gets also the chance to issue his closing remarks.
Oh, Lee, no. So kill two birds with one stone, I guess, in one sense. But you know what, I feel for government. These big policy, public money, accountability, trying to do all things for all people. I agree though with Alyssa. It gets more effective for those communities when it gets closer to the community. And in some cases, in Northern Ontario, there's FedNor. So, and you have these 4 or 5 regional entities that can, do processes and push the money through and down and be accountable for it. But I don't know what the real answer is. But what I would say right from the beginning is get better at communicating within government levels. And I see that, Universal Broadband Fund was giving out 75 to 90% of money. In the province of Ontario would supplement that 25 to 10% of the money. The two were rushed, I believe, for political reasons to try to get programs going at different times. And one went first and one went second. It wasn't necessarily the right order. And then within government, you have other bodies that have pockets of discrete money and they want to get that money spent for themselves. So you have Ministry of Education pumping out money of all these different ministries. And, when one program says connect all the anchors, and then you have 3 other programs addressing those anchors, and then you have a fund that's thrown out ahead of time to get money out as fast as it can, and it gives the money to another group. That's where my fear is. They're trying to do everything. They're trying to do that. But really, step one, just get that communication together, do it in one line. And then, try to push it down as local as possible. But communication is key. And I just didn't see it. Like Alyssa said, they've had decades. Just, get it aligned.
Thanks a lot, Amadeo. We have one other question that's come from come via Facebook, where we're simulcasting this. This is from Jose Paban. What, if possible, are your impressions about the metaverse that was brought up by Facebook and the direction of Facebook? And I heard a couple of people mention that things are going to go more virtual. So is this a positive development, this move into greater virtual reality, et cetera? Or is it something that increases the stakes associated with the digital divide, and something we need to be concerned about, sort of widening that divide, as some have said about the experts or the technologically advanced folks, getting more and more, and those that don't have them getting left further behind. What's your initial reaction to the metaverse?
I'm a tech optimist for the most part, but I would be a metaverse resistor. I still have a strong affinity for the corporeal world, let's say, and I prefer to interact more so with it when possible. So I will leave it at that.
Anyone else want to comment on the metaverse, the move toward a virtual world? All right. Well, that's all the questions that we had in the queue. I want to thank all of our panelists for participating, and Glenn for doing such a great job of moderating. And so virtual round of applause for the panel. We'll have to pipe some, this might be herald the return of the canned audience laughter and applause from the old sitcoms. We'll be piping them into Zoom meetings in order to make them more sound like more people are applauding. But thanks everyone, and thanks for being a part of the panel. Our next session here. Oh, thank you. I think Glenn, I think I still hand control back to you here to close out the session with a Kahoot quiz, and I'm looking forward to seeing how I do. Do you want to introduce it and how people can get online with it?
Yes, I can.
QR code and such?
Yeah, here we go. I'm putting into the chat the link for Kahoots, and let me open it up. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so we're just waiting for the PIN number. The PIN number is going to be coming up, and so there you go. The PIN is 9820000. So join us at kahoot.it or use the app. So if you're on your desktop or laptop, www.kahoot.it, and then it's going to ask you for this PIN number. Okay. So we're just waiting for everybody to join us on the Kahoots. Eduardo, did you want to mention about the prizes?
Yes, sure. Let me put my cell phone here. Hold a second.
We'll give everybody a few minutes because if they're not familiar with Kahoot, it's a nice quiz. Oh, Judith has joined us. Thank you. Welcome, Judith. Go ahead.
I wanted to mention that what we're doing now is we're playing this game. It's called Kahoot. Some of you may know about it. And the reason, this is going to, we're going to have a few questions about what has been happening during the event today. And there will be prizes based on the answers of who answers and the question correctly and how fast you answered them. So this is just a fun part to do it. We have 3 prizes. The first prize is a $75 Amazon card. The second one is $50, and the third prize is $25. But I see only 3 playing, so.
So Richard, I think it's taking a little time. So also try to use your name because if Pop-Tart wins, we're not sure how to reach you because we're not sure who you are. So please try to let us know. So we only have 3 people so far, and we have 3 prizes. So it's going to be pretty easy for you folks. So I am assuming more people are going to come online to join us for the quiz. So give it another minute or 2, and then I'll start the. Okay, let me. Oh, Sas has joined us. Let me add share my sound. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So a few more minutes, and then I'll start, and I'll be turning over to Jonathan to read the questions. And then the way it works is the faster you answer the question, the more points you get. So if you have the same correct answer, say Jonathan got it faster than Judith, he'll score a little bit higher. So every question will have a total. So they're associated with the topic today. So just give me another minute and then we'll start.
Hey, Glenn, I think the link that you posted in the chat is to your, the authoring mode and not to the.
Okay, that was right inside. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so folks, just that is the link. And this is the pin. Okay. Okay, that may be a reason why we're delayed. Okay, so kahoot.it, and the pin you need to type in is 9820000. Okay, Alyssa has joined us. We're going to do a practice question first. So you have roughly, we're giving you a lot of time. We're roughly giving a minute per question. They seem a little long, so I'll try to play the music as loud as possible while we're all waiting. But if you all answer quickly, we can move on to the next question very quickly. So Jonathan,
all right, we got a lot of participants. Let's get more people involved in the game here. All you have to do is go to kahoot.it. You can go to it on your phone or on your desktop, and then type in that pin to participate in the quiz show. If you don't want to put your name, you can tell us later who you are.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
If you want to. So don't be afraid. Sign up and let's see how well we've communicated the concepts of the day.
And I have to let everybody know, Jonathan hasn't seen these questions. So he doesn't have any advantage over anyone else. So everyone's pretty equal here. The only person that's seen them is Eduardo and Alfredo. So we have a quiz today, and we'll conclude tomorrow. And we did get one quiz question already from one of our panelists. And if there's any other quiz questions that you would like to add for tomorrow, let us know and I can swap them out. And they should be associated with the topic tomorrow. Okay. Jonathan, whenever you want to start, I'll hit the start.
All right, let's go ahead.
Okay.
The first question is a test question?
Yep.
All right. All right, the practice question is about Olivier Crepin-Lebond and what are his qualifications or history?
So if you're on your phone, red is former ALAC chair, blue is member in bad standing, gold or yellow is ALAC member, and lastly is unaffiliated member. So just click one of those. You have 20 seconds. You can hear that music? Everybody can dance?
I can hear it.
Is it too loud, Jonathan?
No.
Okay. Okay, so go on. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, there we go. That's how it works. Okay, moving on.
All right.
And you can see everyone's in the same boat and there's no scoring. So now the scoring starts.
Vint Cerf is known as the grandfather of the internet, illegitimate child of a BBS, inventor of the World Wide Web, or father of the internet.
Folks, don't forget, the quicker you answer, the higher score you get. Even if you have the same score as someone else, the faster you kick it in, the higher score you'll get. So red, grandfather of the internet, blue, illegitimate child of a BBS, yellow or gold is inventor of the World Wide Web, or green, father of the internet.
Does everybody remember what a BBS is, or bulletin board service? The house would be filled with the sound of the modem squealing and the static of logging on to a bulletin board system. And back in those days, we used to have to tell people, get off the internet, I need to use the phone.
Bang. Okay, father of the internet. Let's see who is the top scorer. Ta-da!
Good job, Alyssa.
Very good, very good. Okay, moving forward.
All right, the NASIG virtual theme is promoting an integrated, open, and free internet towards an inclusive, trusted, and resilient internet, building solidarity despite COVID-19, or to develop, promote, and maintain a strong internet. Okay,
folks, red is promoting an integrated, open, and free internet. Blue, towards an inclusive, trusted, and resilient internet. Yellow is building solidarity despite COVID. And green, develop, promote, and maintain a strong internet. 20 seconds left.
All of these are laudable goals.
They are good. They're you know, it could be any of our goals.
Now, I should mention for those of you that are paying attention that because Glenn's video feed is on, the answer to this question is in the slide behind his head.
Okay, so blue. Okay, let's see who's creeps ahead. Colonel Spawns at 1813. Wow.
Excellent, excellent. All right, the next question. What issues arise due to the digital divide? Lack of educational opportunities, marginalized online government services, or missed job opportunities? Again, as Glenn has mentioned, you just have to choose the color. So red for lack of educational opportunities, blue for all of the above, yellow for marginalized online government services, and green for missed job opportunities.
"25 seconds. I think we have 2 more questions, right, Jonathan? So we're moving right along. This is ideal for 45 seconds, not 1 minute, but that's the choice we had. So sorry for the delay. Okay, blue, all of the options. So everybody ready? Let's see who's winning now. Wow, storming ahead. This Colonel Spawns is still ahead. Hey, you got some work to do, Jonathan. You have 2 more chances.
I see. All right, which 2 cities hosted a NASIG event? Washington and Seattle, San Juan and Vancouver, Montreal and San Juan, or Chicago and the Big Apple?
Do you think we should say what the Big Apple is? Maybe some people don't know.
The Big Apple is a reference to New York City.
Ah,
So
perfect.
Washington and Seattle, San Juan and Vancouver, Montreal and San Juan, or Chicago and New York?
As you can see in the picture, it's a real international group that was in one of the locations.
And Sally is throwing the answer to the question in the chat. So that's we're getting all kinds of help. Sometimes you have to click it twice if it doesn't register your first click, Sally.
Okay, real quite across the board. So it looks like Montreal and San Juan. That is correct. It would have been Washington last year, but thumb the brakes. So here we go. Wow, he's still ahead. Man, he's storming ahead, this Colonel Spawns. Okay, what do we got now? Okay, last question.
All right, what organization does Lee Rainey represent? The U.S. State Department, that's red. Pew Research Center, blue. Pew Reality Check, yellow, or none of the above?
Are you nervous, Jonathan, that you're not going to win, or you're cool?
I'll be all right. I'll be all right.
You'll survive. Okay.
It's just an honor to be nominated.
Great. Loris Taylor has provided an excellent question for tomorrow towards it. So if anyone else has some additional questions they want me to change the quiz questions, happy to do it. So just fire it off to me. This is a very popular tool used in education. So we'd like to get your feedback if you like this. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Pew
Okay.
Research Center, blue.
Okay, here we go. Da 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 da.
Edged out by Colonel Spawns.
And the second prize went to?
Me, I guess.
And Alyssa is third. Thank you all for playing. That wraps it up, and we'll get out to each of you your Amazon card. Eduardo?
Thank you so
Back
much.
to you, Eduardo.
Thank you so much. I'm here. Sorry. Let me stop the share. Glenn?
Sorry.
Can you
Writing
stop?
down who won. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I want to ask everyone to to join me and turn on your how you call it, you turn on your video and audio if you want, so people can see who are we behind the curtains. Some of us have been the people that talk in the beginning are not with us any longer. So hold a second here. Let me put everyone in the spotlight, and just a few remarks to first thanks everybody for your participation today during the event, especially all the panelists. We have, great presentations that supported the talk about inclusiveness, trustness, and resilient. And tomorrow we are continuing to work under this theme, and we have talking about tribal communities and internet abuse on within the respect of this theme that we have for today's event. Glenn, if you can summarize it somehow what we saw today, we really appreciate that.
Sure. As we stated, when we designed this program, we wanted someone inspirational like Vince Cerf to provide his insights into it. And it's kind of interesting because we think of the 50,000 level view on the whole issue of digital inclusion and digital divide. And he's actually one of the founders of the ISOC special interest groups on interplanetary internet. So he provided an excellent overview of what the challenges are and some of the possible solutions, which were followed by an excellent presentation by Olivier, and his slideshow has been provided as an ebook to everyone, and we'll make sure it's added to the resources that we've been putting with the site as well. And that took us down to the next level. What we tried to do with our panel today on digital divide and digital inclusion is to have two Canadians, one American, that actually have the great research skill sets in terms of what is on the ground, what's happening in US and what is happening in Canada on broadband, what are some groups that are victimized because of it, and what are some of the innovations. So I think as a whole, what we try to do is to provide you with the full range of perspective. And I think all the participants were great. So that's my summary.
Thank you. If any of the other people that have been participating on, if they want to say anything, please, this is the time for saying bye and hello, and probably summarize what you would like to summarize from today's event. Yes, go ahead, Olivier.
Thank you. From now on, I shall be called Colonel Spons. As you can see, cheers to you. I was just going to say thank you for having asked me to do the keynote, and I hope that it's gotten some of you to think a little bit about the future of the net. It's really in our hands. It's really important that we all remember this. And when I see the people that built it so far, we really have a duty to continue making it grow and succeed and not let it fall apart. So there's the power is in our hands. And thank you for the day. It's been really interesting.
Thanks for your presentation, Olivier. It was a great presentation. Sally Brown is here. She didn't participate today because she's going to participate tomorrow in one of our sessions. So you're welcome, Sally. If you want to mention anything about today's event.
I really appreciated the tone of the discussion because there's a lot of people working in different areas related to the internet, but sometimes the discussion that needs to take place has to be more philosophical in nature, which is kind of what I was hearing today, and I appreciated that. There's so many factors. I mean, the internet is just like the study of medicine. I mean, there's so many different ways you can go, and if you're not careful, your head can just be spinning with all of this. And so anyway, I really appreciated hearing what everyone had to say. I've been following Vince Cerf for a while. I really respect the man, and I think I've been on a couple of panels with Glenn before. Amadeo, I know. So yeah, we've got some good minds sitting around the table, and I'm very, very pleased that I was invited by Mark.
Thank you so much. And to finish, I will really want to thank Jonathan Zook for taking us through this, trip from the beginning to end, and he did it just magnificently. So with this in mind, this event will continue tomorrow, same time frame, different people, different themes, but we will be here. And with this, I'm adjourning today's event. Thank you for everyone to being here. Bye.